কিছু দুঃসাহস দিয়ে গড়া জীবন পিছন থেকে উড়ে আসতে পারে মৃত্যুদূত যখন তখন এই যুদ্ধে মাথা উঁচু করে বেঁচে থাকার লড়াইটা মার খেলে আরো জোরে দিতে হবে পাল্টা সময়ের আগে দিলে মোক্ষম চালটা নিশ্চিন্তেই হবে জয় আগুনের চেয়ে দ্রুত তোমাদের বিস্তার সাহসের সাথে আছে হাতে ধরা হাতিয়ার বিপদের হাত ছানি কেটে যায় বারবার তোমাদেরকে সেলাম হে বীর সৈন্য দল তৈরি হও এগিয়ে যাও হে বীর সৈন্য দল প্রাণ দিয়ে দেশ তোমরা বাঁচাও হে বীর সৈন্য দল একা নও আছি আমরা সবাই হে বীর সৈন্য দল জিতে পেরো এই লড়াই করে বেঁচে থাকার লড়াইটা মার খেলে আরো জোরে দিতে হবে পাল্টা সময়ের আগে দিলে মোক্ষম চালটা নিশ্চিন্তেই হবে জয় আগুনের চেয়ে দ্রুত তোমাদের বিস্তার সাহসের সাথে আছে হাতে ধরা হাতিয়ার বিপদের হাত ছানি কেটে যায় বারবার তোমাদেরকে সেলাম তোমরাই আছো তাই নিশ্চিন্ত সবাই দেশপ্রেম তোমাদের সকলের জানা চাই শত্রুর চ্যালেঞ্জে জিতে ফেরো তোমরাই তোমাদেরকে সেলাম বীর সৈন্য দল তৈরি হও এগিয়ে যাও হে বীর সৈন্য দল প্রাণ দিয়ে দেশ তোমরা বাঁচাও হে বীর সৈন্য দল একা নও আছি আমরা সবাই হে বীর সৈন্য দল জিতে পেরো এই লড়াই হে বীর সৈন্য দল তৈরি হও এগিয়ে যাও হে বীর সৈন্য দল প্রাণ দিয়ে দেশ তোমরা বাঁচাও হে বীর সৈন্য দল একা নও আছি আমরা সবাই হে বীর সৈন্য দল জিতে পেরো
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. I hope the audio is coming fine. Now, today's live stream is going to be very, a little different and very much, I think, eye-opening if it hasn't been, our live streams haven't been already. So let me know if the audio is coming fine, by the way. I think it is. Yes. So, hi Retroev, hi Ninar, hi Abhay, hi Milon, hi Ninar, hi Rishi, hi Tatvik. So guys, I can't explain in words the things I have found out today about the, let's say, lies, the absolute fucking lies that have been peddled by idiot, dumb caste strads, communists, and even well-meaning Hindutwadis, who all have forever bought into the idea that casteism and caste is distinctly Hindu or Indian, right? Now, we have already begun to debunk that horseshit absolutely. But today, Sumit Guha is very, very important because this guy has a PhD from Cambridge University of all places, and is currently employed by the University of Texas in Austin. He's a professor of history there, and you won't believe the things he writes in the 40-page paper we are going to discuss. But before that, it's going to be a kind of a long live stream tonight. Luckily, the power didn't go off too much. The cyclone did not hit Bengal very hard, luckily. Now, we are going to first start with this short interview of his from 9 years back, okay, which he gave on a sort of an interview hosted by the University of Texas themselves, okay. And the things he says are the exact things we say. Somehow, we are not taken seriously, nor is he taken seriously, nor is now in this case, his credentials don't even get appreciated, nor is he in any significant academic position in India. Of course, India can't really afford to hire him, but at least he should have been requested to. Perhaps I don't think anyone even knows of him or knows of his work, or probably the idiot part of Sanghis don't even agree with him. They think it never happened, casteism never happened, or it was invented by the British and stuff. But you won't believe the stuff he says. And the other different thing we are going to do today is when we start his paper, we are going to start with the conclusion first, because how bombastic it is. I have two suggestions. One is y'all have some notepad and stuff to take notes, or on your laptop, iPad, something, okay, so that you can take note of the insane things he says. Okay, a PhD from Cambridge and a current professor of history at University of Texas Austin. Secondly, my other suggestion is y'all get hold of the paper yourselves, so that y'all can discuss it, or see it, note it along with it with me when I read it. Okay, the paper is called Civilizations, Markets and Services: Village Servants in India from the 17th to the 20th Century by Dr. Sumit Guha. Okay, this is a paper we'll discuss. He has another insane paper which we will discuss tomorrow or some other day. Now, I haven't read the paper completely. I've just read the abstract and conclusion, and I'm already blown away. And then I have watched this interview. You won't believe what you are in for. You are absolutely in for a ride. So prepare, brace yourselves, buckle up. Abhinav, you haven't missed anything. You are about to get into the insanity here. First, who is Sumit Guha? Now, this is from a website called Since Left Likes to Appropriate Everyone and Anyone Without Really Understanding. Sumit Guha has a history in PhD in 1981 from University of Cambridge. He is Francis Higginbotham Knoll Centennial Professor in History at the University of Texas at Austin. His previous books include Environment and Ethnicity in India, circa 1200 to 1991, written in 1999, and Health and Population in South Asia from earliest times to the present in 2001. And he has another book that he wrote in 2017 called Caste in India or something, which I just ordered today only from Amazon. Okay, let's start the interview.
Welcome, Sumit.
Thank you.
Sumit teaches South Asian history in the history department here at UT Austin, and he's just written a book that we're featuring this month called Beyond Caste, Identity and Power in South Asia. Let's start with the title.
Yeah, Beyond Caste, Identity and Power in South Asia. Now, this is from 9 years back. Okay, some people have said makes sense 2 years back. Now, there's one guy who is already is sort of the, I guess, the Ambedkarite faction of our society. He's saying another expat Brahmin scholar who is trying to justify caste, etc. And then in the comment section, someone says, okay, so we need to believe whatever the imperialist British and European ideas about what foreign cultures are. Genius. So there's somebody already trolling him 3 years back, before J. Sai Deepak brings up sort of a counter to the caste conversation in India. This guy, Bharat 9889, okay? He's already angry with him 8 years back, okay? Even though Sumit Guha is not Brahmin to begin with. He's a caste.
Title. Let's start with something that may be really obvious to you, but isn't to everybody.
Sure.
South Asia includes what? Is it India, or is it something more or less? Why do we use South Asia these days instead of just talking about India?
Right. Yes, that's something that many people are unfamiliar with. And so I routinely get answer books which say Southeast Asia, because that's a term that many Americans are more familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
So South Asia is a term which was devised by the State Department after World War II, because you got a number of independent political states in this area. And if you just used India, there would be confusion between the Republic of India, which occupies about 3/4 of the land area, and the other states, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Myanmar or Burma, Sri Lanka or Ceylon, and Afghanistan. And both Myanmar is sometimes classed as part of Southeast Asia and sometimes as part of South Asia. And similarly, Afghanistan is sometimes thought of as being part of West Asia and sometimes part of South Asia. So the boundary is a bit fuzzy. But the core of it is what is known geographically as the Indian subcontinent. That's the region south of the Himalaya mountains and extending up to the oceans in other directions, the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal, and the South Indian Ocean.
Okay.
Now, the way he describes South Asia already brings to my mind that you can sort of flip the script with this term. Therefore, you see that if he's talking about, just like yesterday's paper, right? Nicholas B. Dirks' paper, Caste and Hierarchy in South Asia, he doesn't say India. So it's already, these terms are going to be helpful to debunk the myth that caste is indigenous to India. Okay, so it's a South Asian phenomenon, at least to begin with. It's not a distinctly Hindu or Indian phenomenon. Now, let's see what he says.
Okay, good. And then now let's turn to the other big word in your title, caste. Yes. I think it'll come as a surprise to many people that caste is not an indigenous South Asian term, but it's something that Europeans brought and during the era of colonialism and for a name for what they found there. Well, tell us a little bit more about where the term came from and when.
Well, the really influential Europeans in the shaping of the kind of Western understanding of India, and indeed of much of Asia, were the Portuguese. And this is during, of course, the period of discoveries. 1498, Vasco da Gama arrives from Portugal to India. And 1492, of course, Columbus is the first European to discover the sea route to the Americas, let me qualify. And so the Portuguese then go on to dominate Asian waters for a long time. And they import a word which is common to both Portuguese and Spanish, and that is casta. And casta for them initially means a closed or a defined group, which, because at this point they're obsessed with the idea of purity of blood and pure and impure descent. This is the period when also they're preparing to expel the Jews from the Iberian Peninsula. So consequently, casta, which is actually just...
See the way he frames it. You see, they were trying to expel the Jews anyway, and that's when they instead come up with this term casta to describe the Indian society.
Meaning a community of people with some sort of common descent, is then very quickly racialized in the emerging racial ideology. And the Dutch and the English, who to a great degree supplant the Portuguese, then take it as borrow it as caste. Mm-hmm. Originally often spelled just C-A-S-T, but then the English add C-A-S-T-E.
And he mentions this. He points it out, leaves it out there, moves on. Because let's just read into this a little more than there might in fact be. But he mentions this, that for some reason, the British decided, let's add an E. It's not just caste, it's caste. T-E. So maybe that was one of the baby steps to make it sound like it's distinctly Indian, to further indigenize it to India or Hinduism.
However, it's one of those loan words that has now become entirely indigenized in India. And it's routinely used in most Indian languages. So
let's talk about that process of it becoming indigenized and go back before the Portuguese. What sort of social or ethnic or hierarchical, or political hierarchy existed that gave them the idea of naming it caste?
Well, this is a time when they're when they're creating and naming various kinds of racial groups across the world. Casta is, of course, a term which was there in this.
The question itself was pretty good to begin with. She says, how does it get mixed up with race and ethnicity and stuff? So he says, see, they were making up racial groups and stuff. They were let's say, impose kar rahe the racial groups on different groups anyway. So, and then they thought this is another racial group maybe.
Spanish Americas. In Mexico, by the 18th century, we began getting albums of illustrations of different castas. What happens when a person from Africa, usually imported as a slave, has children by an Indio in that sense, woman, etc., a white person and a black person, a white person and a Native American, and so on. And each of these would be called a casta. So the idea of having descent categories which are in some way closed is something that they have with them already. They also have, of course, this idea that you have pure and impure blood even among Christians. So people of traceable Moorish or Jewish ancestry had impure blood. So that comes with them. What they encounter in India are closed occupational groups, usually marrying amongst themselves.
Mm-hmm. Occupational groups, usually marrying amongst themselves.
And which are variously termed in different languages. South Asia has a whole number of languages. There are at least 14 or 15 major languages spoken by 30 or 40 million people at minimum. And you also had Arabic and Persian terms for such closed groups. So I could make a very long list of things that were called, that the Portuguese render into caste. But the most common two would be Qawm or Khum, which comes via the Arabic. And it nowadays means nation. And the second would be Jati, which etymologically means actually the group of people that you know, but comes to mean a descent group.
So there were a number of different ways of socially organizing people when the Portuguese got there. And could you talk about those different groups for a little bit first?
Sure. No, so there are a number of terms for such closed dissent groups, but the idea of a dissent group, which is, at least in local society, ranked relative to others, which often pursues a given occupation, was something that was extremely widespread. So what you get, in fact, I've used the metaphor of a multi-stranded rope in my book. So you get several strands. You get a strand which is occupational or guild, a guild-like structure, except in this guild,
भाई गिल्ड इसने 9 साल पहले इन्होंने बोल रखा है. आई फाउंड आउट दैट कास्ट्स कैन बी कॉल्ड गिल्ड फ्रॉम डॉक्टर कौशिक गंगोपाध्याय's बुक लास्ट ईयर और दिस ईयर ओनली.
apprentices have to marry the daughters of other members of the guild. And that's partly how guild membership is defined. So it's occupational, it's marital. Sociologists have called it a marriage pool alliance.
Marriage pool alliance. Another name for caste. Marriage pool alliance. Sociologists have called it, not Hindutvatis.
Which is to say, a group of families which habitually marry each other's children.
And remember, the fact that it became birth-based, especially after the medieval era, during the medieval era, etc. How Irfan Habib actually, in a way, let's say, justifies it. It would be, I think, fair to say that it meant job security, but no mobility, not horizontal, neither nor vertical. Okay, not horizontal, not vertical, but at least job security, and everyone wants to be in that profession, and it's guaranteed that your son will be in that profession and stuff.
And finally, it's ranked in terms of honor and status up and down a sort of social ladder. And it's also a taxation unit very often because unlike medieval guilds.
Horizontal mobility would be like if you change your profession, but in a similar level of work with similar salary and stuff.
You know, if everybody, all the smiths or the carpenters form a caste, and the king wants to levy a cess or a tax upon carpenters, or he wants to mobilize a certain number of them to come and build him a palace.
Now, this is the important part we had also found out from Irfan Habib's paper or lecture. That see, everyone benefited from it.
In fact, I've used the metaphor of a multi-stranded rope as defined. So it's occupational, it's marital. Sociologists have called it a marriage pool alliance, which is to say, a group of families which habitually marry each other's children. And finally, it's ranked in terms of honor and status up and down a sort of social ladder. And it's also a taxation unit very often because unlike medieval guilds, you know, if everybody, all the smiths or the carpenters form a caste, and the king wants to levy a cess or a tax upon carpenters, or he wants to mobilize a certain number of them to come and build him a palace, then he goes to the headman of the caste. So it fulfills. It's a closed group at which, to go back to the metaphor of a multi-stranded rope, a number of economic, political, administrative, and kinship strands all intertwine.
And in your book, you point out that there are differences between Hindu communities and non-Hindu communities. How does that play into these different hierarchies and these different networks of groups?
Well, any society where social groups interact regularly and intensively is going to work out ways in which they relate to each other. And this is particularly true in societies where the state is not very strong, and self-help, sometimes violent self-help, is the major way in which you resolve disputes.
When it's a decentralized society, when the king is not a crazy fucking dictator who says everything will be done by what I say in the palace in my capital, okay? The opposite of the Ashokan state.
So therefore, if you get a non-Muslim group of merchants, a Muslim, let's say, or even a Christian, a Syrian Christian group of merchants who come and settle, they quickly, because they only marry amongst themselves and they tend to live in a segregated residential unit, they will quickly take on, for all external purposes, the characteristics of a caste. Internally, they don't have some of the ideologies and the religious beliefs associated with caste, but as far as the external relationships with the other groups in society are concerned, they are a caste. And when the British, for example, begin to rule the city, the island of Bombay, which is 1665, they decide that they need to recognize 15 castes One of these is Portuguese Christians. One of them is Parsis, which are refugees from Iran who are not actually Hindus at all, but have a different, much older, the Zoroastrian faith, and so on. So that you get all these groups. And for the municipal government of Bombay, the company's government of Bombay, as you know, these are castes, and the government is going to deal with them as
These are castes. And of course, they always marry amongst each other when there is no casteism in any way, I guess, in the legally speaking, at least, way. Although you could say reservation is a form of incentivizing casteism and etc. But Parsis even today are mostly endogamous. Syrian Christians are mostly endogamous even today. It's not like they were made to be segregated. They came here running from other people, both the Zoroastrians and the Syrian Christians. Actually, they came as Syrian Jews, as far as I know. Then Saint Thomas came and converted them into Christianity, and then they became Syrian Christians, right?
As castes. They have headmen. They decide their own disputes. They give advice on property, on marriage disputes. And why exactly they form a corporate group is not the king or the East India Company's concern.
Mm-hmm. But it's easier for...
So no one is fighting against casteism, okay? Irfan Habib said Mughals never had a problem with casteism. They used it to their benefit. He is saying the Portuguese and the British also used casteism to their benefit, because it helps you to look at a society, analyze a society, collect data. Now, after listening to this interview, I'm getting the hunch that actually no politician in the country actually wants to annihilate caste completely. Maybe only BJP and Narendra Modi, because they put up a dominant CM in every a non-dominant caste chief minister in every state, where there is significant cosplaying and fancy dress competition of previous castes. But everyone else, I think, has found out the same secret, let's say, ingredient to running the country, which CPIM and Congress did pretty overtly. They never fucked with the dominant castes of every place. But if you let casteism go on, it helps you run the society. Earlier on, casteism was a result of the state not being too authoritarian. Now the authoritarian state uses casteism to its own benefit.
For the king and the East India Company to administer the whole community when it's organized in a way that they can understand.
Yes, absolutely. And also in which they can delegate. It's hard to find out whether this weaver is a little richer or a little poorer than the next weaver when you want to levy a tax. So what you do is you assess the whole weaver community on a lump sum, and you tell the headman to distribute the taxes amongst them and to come up with a certain sum to the treasury, short of which he's going to get flogged or thrown in prison. So it works.
So if you...
In the interest of being politically correct, I'm not laughing at the idea of anyone getting flogged, okay?
You could generalize, what are the major changes that took place after the British came in the 17th century? How does the caste system change?
Well, initially it doesn't. It functions just as it did, for example, under the Islamic sultans in parts, or as it did under the Dutch in Sri Lanka. The Dutch organized the caste system in order to deliver cinnamon. Both the actual people, there's a caste of people who become specialists in peeling the cinnamon bark from the trees, and various auxiliary castes that help with the production. But essentially, colonial rule, which is very slow in coming to South Asia, really, Eastern India comes under British rule in the 1750s and 1760s, when they've already been here for 150 years. And the rest of India really comes under British administration only by the mid-19th century, around 1849, say. So, and the East India Company's interest is running a profitable governing and trading operation. And they do not want to mess with local society any more than is necessary.
Right. They had no intention of solving the issue of casteism. Now, as far as the Bombay issue, Ajju, I don't think any non-Marathi or non-Maharashtra person who emigrated out of India before it became Mumbai, till date calls it Mumbai. Okay, same as Calcutta and Kolkata. Okay, yeah, he used to be in Rutgers. Okay, now he is in University of Austin. But when he was in Rutgers and Audrey Truschke was doing it, what do you expect him to do exactly? But anyway, that's like saying any non-left musician has to fight against all the leftists in the industry to and prioritize that over everything else.
And so they find working through caste headmen, dealing with disputes through them, getting their advice on matters such as divorce, inheritance, quarrels over property, etc. It's just as administratively expedient and useful for them as it was for previous rulers. So they pretty much leave things unchanged.
They leave things unchanged.
It's only from the middle of the 19th century that some of the unintended consequences of British rule began to unravel the process, and the action of Christian missionaries.
Unintended consequence of the British unravel the process, not intended consequence. They did not solve casteism. Okay, plus there were countless anti-caste movements inside Hinduism already going on anyway. But now he's going to point out something we had discussed based on Mr. Sociologist's findings about a year back, that it was he doesn't name Brahmo Samajis. My hunch is he talks about Brahmo Samajis who peddled the Aryan invasion theory further, and because they thought they are the distant relatives of European Christians, because they all were Aryans and stuff. That gets also that also backfires. Okay, he points that out as well.
Who for centuries actually had also adapted to caste, so that Christians observed caste.
What do you mean by that?
Oh, they sat on different pews in the church. If they had a common church at all, the lower castes will often be given a separate church, to which the upper caste, the converts of the upper castes would not go. And they had headmen who organized affairs. They married only amongst the community. And in 1787, you have, after 150 years after the island of Goa, the British Portuguese colony there has been converted to Roman Catholicism, a group of Brahmins there. I mean, they're Roman Catholics, but they're Brahmins. They're also junior members of the Roman Catholic clergy, get together to stage a conspiracy to try and throw out the Portuguese and establish the rule of Christian Brahmins. Brahmins are the priestly caste in the Indian subcontinent. So you have Christian Brahmins who have preserved generations, traditions of their own ancestry for at least 150 years and claim to be Brahmins. And then they get together with other Brahmins to try and oust the Portuguese because they feel they're not getting an appropriate share of church office and authority. I mean, can you think of anything more ironic and sort of complicated than that?
Actually, Avinav, yeah, well pointed out. But you see, these are just cool dialogues, right? And okay, after all, politician cool dialogue नहीं देगा तो क्या देगा? वो सब कोई थोड़ी बैठ के research paper discuss करेंगे. But these don't make sense. There are many more castes today, just like there were in the yesteryears. But more importantly, I should have mentioned this in my yesterday's, or when did I come last? I am forgetting everything. My sleep cycle is so fucking weird right now. So in my last live stream, I forgot to mention that when we were discussing Nicholas Bider's paper only, right? Yeah, and we were comparing it with today's Bhadraloks, who are today's Brahmins or Brahmina, like quasi-Brahmin, Brahmin adjacent and stuff. You see, that is why Rajiv Malhotra, even though he is actually Brahmin, right? Malhotra, I guess, naam mein Hotra hai, to I think Brahmin hi hoga. But he is not really Brahmin today, in today's context, in the true meaning of the word. And that's why his research, actually, basically, Rajiv Malhotra has been saying the same things we have been saying in the last 1 or 2 years, right? That the academia is being funded by people who probably don't really have the best interests of India at heart. And therefore, something must be done to tackle that. Rajiv Malhotra is saying that. We are saying exactly that. And he has brought his own research. He has written book after book after book, held conferences after conferences, tied up with people, collaborated with people, spent a shit ton of his own money in doing this. He is not taken seriously at all in academia. Why? Because he is not a Brahmin in today's sense. Because he is an engineer who retired. He does not have the credentials of liberal arts academia. He is not a social scientist, nor is he a liberal arts graduate or PhD. Okay, so he is not a true Brahmin. He does not have the proper Janeu.
Yeah, your book makes it it really resists the idea that caste is a simple ladder of hierarchies, and it shows a lot of different ways in which these corporate groups related to one another. You really emphasize the political uses of caste and the ways in which caste then is used for the political powers to organize people beneath them. And you also emphasize something you call ethnicity. So in what way does caste organize itself ethnically?
Right, that's a good question. Well, ethnos is, of course, it enters Western languages via rendering from the Hebrew goyim, the peoples, as distinct from the chosen people. So the nations, it's sometimes rendered in the in the authorized version. So ethnos is a kind of in the Western categories, and for example, in Max Weber, it tends to have this idea of being a closed group, which within itself contains all the branches of the division of labor. That, in fact, was how 20th century thought tended to classify it. However, since World War II, it's become fairly evident that such closed, entirely self-sufficient groups, occupationally and otherwise self-sufficient groups, are very rare. Most ethnic groups live mixed in with other groups, and when they do, they tend to develop stable patterns of relationship, very often relations of dominance or professional specialization. And in that sense, both the hierarchies of dominance and of business and economic professionalization, which I see in the caste system, caste can be thought of as being an exceptionally involuted or complex type of ethnic hierarchy. And there's a passage from Max Weber's writings, which were translated by Gareth and Mills, where, in fact, he makes this argument. He says that ethnic hierarchy, a stable ethnic hierarchy, is, in fact, a caste hierarchy.
So that's a concept of ethnicity that is very separate from race or from where caste started as sort of blood purity.
Well, the Western idea of caste started, yes.
Yeah.
Because in the Indic concept, descent
Indic
purity
concept.
might be one of the criteria.
Oh
But for instance, a
my
Brahmin
God. He says three insane things, one after the other. Okay, first of all, the first aspect would be that he quoted Max Weber. Then he says the Western understanding of caste. Then he says there's an Indic understanding of caste. And then he says this. The purity, impurity, the Manusmriti aspect of it is just one aspect.
Purity.
well, the Western idea of caste started, yes.
Yeah.
Because in the Indic concept, descent purity might be one of the criteria. But for instance, a Brahmin who ate beef, let us say, would be expelled from his caste and could perhaps never be readmitted. He would be classed with the lowest castes.
Right. Hence it's not really hereditary.
Because he has polluted himself, irreparably. So you have this kind of so it's actually it maintains several criteria for membership, but ultimately membership was decided by the other members of the caste. Do we take this person back, or do we kick him out for him or her, or out forever? So essentially, it's a very autonomous group. Though sometimes you get people going and complaining to the king, or later on to the Bombay High Court, saying that my caste has expelled me and is refusing to invite me to the religious feasts at the particular set days of the year, and kindly issue an order saying that they have to take me back. And you get examples of such orders. You even get high court verdicts on these issues.
So I asked about ethnicity because we tend to think of ethnicity as being racially defined or in some way connected with race or nation. But what you're describing is much more social and occupationally oriented. Is there a racial element in caste, or is that something that becomes part of caste over the centuries?
Are Divya, we discussed an entire paper on that. It was Declan Quigley's paper, remember?
Well, I'm covering a period of approximately 1,000 years more for most of the book, but I go back about another 1,000 before that. So, and there are many, many centuries for which we know very little and regions. So with that caveat, but race is a comparatively new idea in Western thought, even where it originated. And as long as the biblical genealogies were held, to be absolutely true, you couldn't in fact have it. It was of great contortions that the idea that the sons of Ham were cursed to servitude was brought in by the slaveholding churches, both in the Americas and elsewhere. So it's a new concept, even in Western thought, and where it originated. And it was sort of borrowed in the 20th century as a part of the Nordic or Aryan myth of descent. And what you get is some of the upper castes in India latching onto this Western theory to claim that they are of Aryan descent, whereas the lower castes are not, and consequently they belong to the superior Aryan race, to which, of course, Europeans were the acme. And so race does come in as a modern ideology, but it has, in fact, caste has become increasingly, and this is a term which was used by Louis Dumont, the French anthropologist.
Okay, our favorite sociologist, Dumont.
It has become ethnicity.
Anand, bro, please watch this from the beginning, or at least watch the interview on your own from the beginning for some other time.
In which it has stopped being about conduct and purity and has become dissent. Sort of dissent group, and in that sense, it's close to caste. It's close to race and to ethnicity.
Well, you tell a wonderfully complex story about something that I think most people assume is a relatively simple hierarchy. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So, Anand, you need to especially listen to this from the very beginning, because remember when you had joined our stream on an audience interaction day, we were discussing how castes are basically guilds. He uses that word as well. This video is from 9 years back. Okay, he says it's a guild or it's a marriage alliance pool. He uses all these terms. Now let's get to the paper. और ये Rutgers में. How is he in Rutgers? He's in Austin, Texas. So was he in Rutgers, or is Rutgers a think tank? I don't know what exactly Rutgers is. Is it a university? It's in university, right? So he's not in Rutgers anymore, right? Okay, let's start the insane paper, of which we will first start with the conclusion, because it's that mind-blowing, mind-boggling. So let me put this monitor here. Yeah, check out the conclusion first. Okay. Rutgers is where Trushki is from. Yes, but why are people saying he is in Rutgers? Maybe he was at some point in Rutgers. He's a fucking Cambridge PhD. Why wouldn't he be at Rutgers? He will be at all elite universities. India के elite university में इसको बिठाने से कौन किसको मना कर रहा है भाई? वही तो मेरा आज का main प्रश्न है. Why isn't this guy in any Indian university? Why isn't Declan Quigley in an Indian university? Why isn't Nicholas Dirks in an Indian university? Why isn't Janki Bakle teaching in Indian universities that Savarkar had nothing to do with being a Mafi Veer? So the conclusion of the paper we are going to discuss today. There are 3 sentences. The first sentence and the last sentence is absolutely insane. The tone is insane. It will be evident that I am deeply skeptical of attempts to trace socio-economic institutions to fundamental values. Okay, fundamental values के साथ deep socio-economic institutions हम जोड़ नहीं सकते हैं, and that I have found considerable evidence to suggest that individuals systematically sought to modify and invent customs and institutions to their own perceived advantage, and that the patrimonial, meaning caste system, birth-based caste system, and the latter, the later colonial state, both of these systems tried to derive fiscal, meaning financial, and political advantage from these efforts. Okay, in the end, it was political and financial economic advantage. Okay, hence you see what's happening today in today's Indian politics is nothing different. The occurrence is same, and even if the occurrence remains same, we can flip the script, playing in these sets of rules. You can't probably really do anything more than that, other than, of course, virtue signaling. But more importantly, this reminds me of the day we were discussing, the last day of discussing Max Weber's book, Religions of India, that Brahmins made their own rituals. When an inconvenience came about with that ritual, following the ritual or executing that ritual, they made backdoor rituals to that previous ritual as well. Okay. Now, second sentence. The varying outcomes of these ceaseless contests explains why institutions varied considerably at different times and in different regions. Yahi to hai hamara argument. Now the bombastic third line, the last line of the paper. Society was never static in some quote-unquote traditional mode, and social change is not something that arrived in South Asia with colonial rule or the first 5-year plan. Can you believe this sentence, guys? Are you all understanding what the insane significance of this sentence is. It busts every fucking myth that 99% of Indians believe in. Society was never static in some traditional mode. Social change is not something that arrived in South Asia with colonial rule or the first 5-year plan. Lol. Let's start the paper now. We are going to discuss the Jajmani system. Yeah, so you see, Jaffrello is in India teaching. Trushke used to teach in India for a while. Now, this guy, Aju, is saying he was in Rutgers in 2004, when most of us weren't on this side anyway. So why are we blaming him? I'm not going to read out Nina's comment here because I'm trying to be politically correct a little bit. So, civilizations, markets, and services. Village servants in India from the 17th to the 20th century. Sumit Guha when he was in Brown University, another elite Ivy League university. So the abstract of the university of the paper is that this article focuses on the history of the set of practices labeled Jajmani. These practices have been cited as evidence that a fundamentally inegalitarian spiritual principle could transcend and limit the economic domain, okay? The all-encompassing deep state Brahmins, okay? The idea underpins the belief that human beings must be grouped into mutually exclusive, quote-unquote, civilizations. Projected geopolitically, the quote-unquote civilization is then endowed by Samuel Huntington with the Hobbesian self-aggrandizing traits of the nation state, okay? I suggest that we eschew grand unifying principles and try understand the meanings and motives that generate to the repetitive patterns of meaningful interaction, which we refer to as a society, a social practice, or an institution. This paper offers a historical analysis of the debate stemming from opposed understandings of a South Asian socio-economic institution and of its social history through the past few centuries. It focuses specifically on the economically, socially, and ritually significant practices grouped under the label of Jajmani and or Baluta system. These have been presented as exemplars of how productive activity can be organized on non-economic principles, untouched by individualism and market rationality, and determined by the fundamentally religious values of Hindu society, all of which are wrong. Obviously, he's making fun of these ideas that as if Jajmani system had non-economic principles or were untouched by individualism or did not have any market rationality behind them. Okay, and they were fundamentally religious values of Hindu society. The missionary anthropologist. Is he doing this on purpose, or is this coming across as trolling only to us? So, the missionary anthropologist W.H. Weiser is usually credited with the earliest formal statement on these lines. Okay, guys, he points out a missionary anthropologist was the first one who pointed out that the Jajmani system is an entirely religious system that people follow after reading a few pages of Manusmriti every morning, I guess. The missionary anthropologist W.H. Weiser is usually credited with the earliest formal statement on these lines. And remember, these were the days of anthropology when anthropology was mired in eugenicism and stuff, and all sorts of genocidal, maniacal concepts that came out of anthropology. These were the days of that kind of anthropology, by the way. A year after the second edition had appeared in 1958, the entire religious formulation was sharply criticized by Thomas Beidelman, who argued that the system was maintained only by the exercise of the socio-economic power that arose from landholding. As we shall see below, the influential Louis Dumont, perhaps heedful of this critique, therefore, Dumont did not use Weiser's description as evidence of the equalizing roles of religious incorporation. Okay, so Dumont already realizes that missionary anthropologist ko to gali pad rahi hai. I'll explain it in some other way, but say the same thing. Instead, Dumont cited Jajmani as evidence that a fundamentally inegalitarian spiritual principle could transcend and limit not merely the political but also the economic domain. This is an issue with implications beyond the narrow worlds of Indology or social anthropology. While I do not intend to address this in the present essay, the heuristic assumption that human beings must be grouped into large, temporally stable and mutually exclusive civilizations is central to the thought of Dumont and his ilk. This guiding principle, once admitted, scholarly effort then logically seeks to identify the unifying demarcating principle of each civilization. And as the unique national spirit, so popular in the 19th century, fell out of fashion after World War I, the seemingly more benign but still mutually incommunicable civilizational or cultural identity acquired a new prominence in the academy, meaning inside academia. Projected geopolitically, the quote unquote civilization is then endowed with the Hobbesian, not I said Hobbesian, oh my god, then endowed with the Hobbesian self-aggrandizing traits of the erstwhile nation, and this model found its popularizer in 1996 with the runaway success of Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. Returning to Dumont on Jajmani, it becomes evident that the effort to determine whether the economic or political or any other mental construct encompasses or controls arises fundamentally from the drive to find a unifying civilizational principle, so that the outsider is of course the one who is trying to do this. He is able to define India or any country in a society in one way, in one sentence or in one term. वही है वो चाह जिसके वजह से ये थॉट प्रोसेस शुरू होता है. Economic success being permanently reserved for the West, something else had to be found for India. And what better candidate than Hinduism, broadly construed? See, this is exactly the brilliant critique actually that even Amartya Sen brings out, that acha, economic understanding, hard sciences, research, वो सब West का है, हमारा हम तो है spirituality में better, and people concede that point and celebrate that point and give away our past brilliance and in mathematics and hard sciences. South Asian society then led to be amputated to fit the Procrustean bed that thus fashioned. Okay, South Asian society becomes amputated to fit into the Procrustean bed that that thus fashioned. 12 centuries of Islam counted for nothing. It is in short a question of two societies. This is from, I guess, Huntington's book. It is in short a question of two societies, Hinduism and Islam, which were strangers to one another in virtue of the opposition of their values, although living cheek by jowl, in fact. Their association resting on a sort of tacit and reciprocal compromise. For their part, the Hindus had to adjust themselves for long periods and over huge regions to political masters who did not recognize Brahmanic values, and they did not treat even the most humble Muslim villagers as untouchables. This sweeping statement can only be made if we understand society so as to exclude many of the transactions that people routinely have with each other from the ambit of this term, because once you buy into this idea that some things are distinctly Indian and stuff, and India is all about spirituality and religion only, then after that you can use any excuse to justify it and come up with confirmation bias and mention one insane thing after the other and blame it all on the society and the culture and religion of that place, ignoring therefore the inevitable socioeconomic circumstances that give birth to those situations elsewhere as well. But you have come up with a different name for this, and caste strads and commies are both happy with crediting or crediting India with this evil / great thing. Such a formulation is an obstacle rather than an aid to understanding. Perhaps what we need to do is eschew grand unifying principles and try understand the meanings and motives that generate to the repetitive patterns of meaningful interaction that we refer to as a society or a social practice or institution. Nor should we anachronistically force these into boxes labeled economic, social, political, religious, etc. I shall now try and demonstrate this by a study of the links between the state, ascriptive status, meaning caste. Ninar, where are you? M. Shastri, Bhupendro, Avinav, Divya. See, he directly, blatantly, calmly, casually uses a completely different phrase for caste and puts caste in fucking brackets. Ascriptive status. Joy Baba, Max Weber. Okay. See, RSS Kadala Max Weber has had such influence on this guy. I shall now try and demonstrate this by a study of the links between the state, ascriptive status, and economic life in Western India through the past 3 centuries. The first section of this article discusses the varying positions taken by major scholars on the issue before moving to historical analysis of two related institutions, Baluta and Jajmani. Baluta is used to describe a system in which specified goods and services were provided by hereditary functionaries to theoretically all the households in a given village community in return for equally specific payments in kind, sometimes supplemented with cash at the harvest and on festive occasions. Seems like a job security to me. Jajmani has entered sociological literature to describe the relationship between a patron household and individual servant households that supplied it and others like it with goods or services in return for payments at harvest and on other occasions. While some scholars have seen these as distinct from each other, others like Dumont have treated them as expressions of a single civilizational principle. I shall, however, use these terms as defined in this paragraph. The next part looks at evidences of the geographical spread and economic logic of the Jajmani system in the 20th century and suggests that rent seeking and the market were important determinants of its changing structure and regional parlance. This section is followed by one offering a historical analysis of Baluta in Maharashtra from the 17th century onward. It suggests that the practice was always fraught with conflict and provides evidence of its occasional breakdown and re-establishment. तो भाई हम अगर मनुस्मृति पढ़ के ये सब कर रहे थे तो breakdown काहे हुआ, re-establishment कैसे हुआ? It would follow then that the system may have repeatedly come into being and disintegrated in different regions at various times. Doesn't this sound familiar, okay? Different regions in different times, guys. The last part of the paper shows this process at work. The institution was little known in eastern Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh in the early 19th century when it was solidly established in western Maharashtra. But intensive local enquiries reveal that it was beginning to establish itself in the eastern region. After reviewing this case, the paper moves to conclude that Baluta was not a primitive institution, but one that was created by the state out of competition between specialists in a commercializing rural society. Specialists. Specialist kaise hua wo? Neener, he won't cite Declan Quigley. He's much more senior than Quigley, actually. Quigley is hardly in his late 40s. He has written these papers so long back. After reviewing this case, the paper moves to conclude that Baluta was not a primitive institution, but one that was created by the state out of competition between specialists in a commercializing rural society. Okay? This sounds like today's socialist state as well. Finally, I must emphasize that this society was not composed of socially indistinguishable agents, each of whom was devoid of tastes, preferences, and socio-religious ideas. So, this society was comprised of agents who did have tastes, preferences, and different socio-religious ideas. Moving beyond economic versus cultural explanations, okay? Let's go beyond this. Actually, I will have to, this beyond se yaad aaya. The book is called Beyond Caste. He's talking about going beyond economic versus cultural, either economic or cultural sort of explanations. I will read out to you 2 paragraphs out of this legendary book, Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche. And that will be sort of a conclusion to our live stream today, that what are the caste strads and commies getting wrong about Indian society and how we are now taking a different path, and how our worldview is actually more Nietzschean in a way. The village servant system, or Baluta system to use its Marathi name, and the Jajmani system have attained a certain importance in social theory because they appear to exemplify the possibility of organizing the division of labor in complex societies on principles radically different from those formulated by mainstream economics since the 18th century. अब तुम 18th century के बाद जो theoreticization वो तुम apply करके बिठाना चाह रहे हो on past institutions. It is for this reason significant in the substantivist formalist debate in economic anthropology inaugurated by Polanyi in the 1940s. But as I have suggested in the introduction to this article, this debate has prevented us from examining a changing set of institutional practices on its own terms, and thus impeded rather than aided a historical understanding of it. And this impeded section is, I think, very important, because what do we notice, guys? By everyone trying to solve casteism in India, that they don't fucking solve casteism, that they just incentivize casteism, or just glorify one group over the other, or just stick to signaling that they are against casteism, or some people just stick to signaling that they are against Brahmins. So this is a problem here, that these discourses have impeded rather than aided a historical understanding of it. और जब तुम समझोगे ही नहीं चीज को ठीक से, तो तुम सॉल्व कैसे करोगे वो प्रॉब्लम को? लाइक अगेन वो ঋত্বিক ঘটক's quote yesterday that I pointed out from যুক্তক্ষ গপ্প, কোনো কিছু নেই বললেই চলে যাবে না, তাকে জড়িয়ে ধরে উপড়ে ফেলতে হবে। You have to hug that problem and pull it out of the ground. This was noted by C.J. Fuller some years ago on the basis of a legendary sociologist, I think is called father of sociology. What do you define as caste trad? One who follows traditions but also hates anyone who is below their caste today. On the basis of a review of about a dozen 20th century village studies and some secondary historical literature, he correctly concluded that the concept of Jajmani as a system is predicated upon a combination of historical inaccuracy and the ahistorical premise of unchanging traditional, so-called quote-unquote traditional India. He then suggests that we were only following traditions. भाई हमारा अर्थशास्त्र फास्त्र इकोनॉमी कुछ नहीं था, सिर्फ सुबह से शाम हम पूजा करते थे और सोचते थे कि ट्रेडिशन के बेसिस पे क्या क्या मतलब ठीक है गलत है। हमारा इंसेंटिव स्ट्रक्चर नाम का कोई चीज नहीं था, पर्सनल इंटरेस्ट नहीं था, कन्वीनियंस नहीं था, हरामीपंथी नहीं था, कुछ नहीं था, सिर्फ ट्रेडिशन था। He then suggests that his demolition might open the way to a more productive analysis of forms of exchange in Indian society. This article aims at advancing that agenda. I think it's our agenda as well. But the debate is also significant as it forms in the work of Dumont a central support of the ideas that South Asia or Hindu civilization. Oh shit. But the debate is also significant as it forms in the work of Dumont a central support of the idea that South Asian or Hindu civilization is founded on principles totally different from those of the West, and that the caste quote-unquote system is fundamental to it, according to Dumont. He is making a fun of all that. First of all, he is equating the term Hindu civilization with South Asian civilization, and then saying people like Dumont believe that as if our way of life, or I mean our principles of organization, is completely different from the West, or that the caste system, he says quote unquote system, because remember, it's actually not a system. There's no system. It's a fucking chaos that was kind of systematized and therefore rigidified and solidified by the British. So that the caste so-called system is as if it's fundamental to it, which it isn't. But caste-strads and commies will disagree. More recently, Morton Class reinstated caste theoretically as the economic center of South Asian society. He was satisfied that one may view the South Asian caste system as a crucial integrative feature of a particular redistributive economic system. Redistributive economic system. This is a stratified society. Not everyone has equal or even equivalent access to the basic resource, land on which to grow a crop. And in this particular stratified society, we have observed that control and access is neither by individuals nor by households. Rather, the South Asian socio-economic system is structurally inseparable from the caste system. In this, he was echoing the work of W.C. Neal, who had already declared that the economy of India was built upon the joint family, which was generally able to satisfy its own needs. When the aid of a craftsman or a special service such as that of a watchman was required, the village provided it. Cutting across village lines, the castes provided a code of behavior governing the relationships between members of the various castes. So perfect was the ideological integration that Neal imagined. There was, quote unquote, no bargaining, no payment for specific services rendered. There was no accounting, and the whole produce was easily and successfully divided among the villagers. Now, obviously, Sumit Guha is trying to hint that he's wrong. Contrast this to the reality of a North Indian village around 1950, as described in the memoir of a Dalit youth who grew up in it. He narrates an incident deeply revealing of the actual texture of Jajmani relations. His mother worked for 8 or 10 Tyagi households. One of these was celebrating a daughter's wedding, and his mother waited with him and his young sister to clear up and take away the basket in which the guests threw their used leaf plates and uneaten food. These scraps were her remuneration for the extra work. When all the guests had left, she asked for a leaf cup of food for her children. Quote, Sukhdev Singh pointed to the basket full of soiled leaf plates and said, she's taking a full basket of food refuse, Jutan. And on top of that asks food for her children. Mind your status, oh Churi. Pick up the basket and get out. Mind your status. See, everyone inherently knows that castes are basically status groups, and therefore when we point this discourse towards Bengal, it's going to be a sort of a field day of revelations. So mind your status, oh chori. I guess Aukat mein raho, that's what he said. Pick up the basket and get out. That day, the goddess Durga descended into my mother. I had never seen her thus before. She scattered the contents of the basket and said to Sukhdev Singh, gather this and store it in your house. Feed it to your guests for breakfast. Holy shit. She took our hands and left, swift as an arrow. Sukhdev Singh had stepped forward to strike her, but she faced him down like a tigress. From that day, she never went to their door again, and the custom of collecting soil scraps ended in our household. And economic and political weakness and social inferiority continued seamlessly into labor market settings. Another quote. Most Tagas, upper caste landowners claiming Brahman status, stinted on wages for their employees. The reapers were desperate. After some protests, they took whatever was given and came home. Upon getting home, they grumbled or kept cursing the Tagas. But protest was strangled by hunger. Each year, there were meetings in the Dalit quarter over harvest wages. Participants would swear not to accept less than one bundle out of 16 harvested. But once the work was done, their resolve evaporated. One bundle out of 21 was the best that could be got, which is why WBC's officers of West Bengal are happy with the joke of a DA that they get, because they of course oppose the central government, which gives much more DA. Neil's ideas of harmonious reciprocity are a less developed form of Dumont's famous understanding of South Asian civilization over the past few millennia as being constructed on the foundation of our normative inequality, something radically different from the allegedly Western norm of equality. In his view, these relations of service were the most deeply resistant to the modernizing impact of the West. In the revised edition of Homo Hierarchicus, that infamous book, okay? In the revised edition of Homo Hierarchicus, Dumont concludes, in the caste system, profession is linked to status only by its religious aspects, and for the rest, hinges on power. It has been possible for new neutral and urban professions to emerge, while the professions really relevant to the system, village specialties, were only slightly affected. At most, it is likely that Jajmani has become restricted to properly religious and personal services and has let escape some professions which it covered previously. In the caste system, the politico-economic aspects are relatively secondary and isolated, according to Dumont. We may in passing notice that this assumes right away that the quote-unquote caste system is something quite distinct from the quote-unquote politico-economic, and that a profession easily separates into religious on one side and power-related aspects on the other side, as if in Indian society. These, as I shall demonstrate, are profoundly ill-informed ideas, and given the publication of Fukazawa's important essay in English in 1972, perhaps deliberately so. In part, this arises from a truly archaic understanding of concrete market phenomena. Dumont believes that, quote, in a market, all buyers and all sellers are as such identical, each after his own profit, and needs are adjusted unconsciously by the market mechanism. But this is not the case here in the Indian village. Not only are the majority of the relationships personal, but this is so in virtue of an organization which is to some extent deliberate and oriented towards the satisfaction of the needs of all those who enter into the system of relationships. Whilst directly religious prestations and quote-unquote economic prestations are mingled together, this takes place within the prescribed order, the religious order. We shall feel in the end that we are not in the world of modern economic individual, but in a sort of cooperative where the main aim is to ensure the subsistence of everyone in accordance with his social function. In the one case, the reference is to the individual pursuing his own gain, in the other to the hierarchical collectivity. The conclusion to be drawn from this for the Jajmani system is that it eludes what we call economics. Okay, so according to Dumont, Jajmani system has nothing to do with economics because it is founded on an implicit reference to the whole, which in its nature is religious, or if one prefers, a matter of ultimate values. End quote. The above quotation assumes that markets can only function by erasing all identities in the marketplace. In fact, it is only under special conditions that buyers and sellers can really become anonymous and indistinguishable. As anybody, and especially a white anthropologist who has shopped in a bazaar, should know, buyers and sellers can find it advantageous to try and negotiate the best possible terms on a case-by-case basis, drawing information from signs of visible social status, including appearance, speech, dress, etc., to assess the other party. For example, today, if a no matter how famous a singer, if he is called by A.R. Rahman to sing in his concerts, if A.R. Rahman says that I'll pay you a little less than what you usually charge, because A.R. Rahman, of course, is not going to make him sing for 2.5 hours, right? Plus, there will be other singers and stuff. But more importantly, the singer agrees, and the singer might not have agreed for the same amount of singing that he would have to do in some other places, because singing with A.R. Rahman is a big fucking deal in itself. And that's the same for even the beginner. Equally, if buyers are not homogeneous, neither are commodities, services, etc. A vendor who sold at a uniform price could benefit from the ignorance of some consumers. Right. Uniform prices for homogeneous products emerge in mass markets supplied by machine production, markets where learning about the other party is costly, either in direct money terms, for example, by a credit report, or in terms of opportunity costs, for example, losing sales while getting this information via bargaining or special or personal inquiry. So, the early industrial revolution and the modern city encouraged the emergence of mass markets where standardized goods were sold to a mass of indistinguishable buyers. But efforts at discriminatory pricing immediately re-emerged when the individual transaction increases in size, or when the cost of information acquisition and processing falls. जैसे कि है today's data industry. You are putting up your own data in every app and OTT and etc. or social media platforms. Such individualized bargaining is almost routine in trade in big ticket items, for example, ships, passenger or combat aircraft, or turnkey industrial plants, where a few agents with a lot of knowledge of each other interact. Finally, as modern information technology reduces the cost of acquiring and processing information, even vendors of mass market consumer goods in developed countries, particularly the USA, try and build up consumer preference databases and profiles, exactly what I just said. The simple anonymity and the so-called no information except price available is a model that dominated Western consumer goods markets after the Industrial Revolution and up to the current infotech revolution, which has substantially eroded it. It should not be expected to shed much light on economic relations in typical South Asian rural situation of repeated interactions between a small number of transactors with a great deal of time on their hands. Let me have a sip of coffee and check out some comments now. What's going on in the comment section? You are discussing theology. Atrishwar is saying, only who did not understand the real spiritual side, Vivek of Swami Vivekananda will quote Swamiji on this. We are spiritual and West is scientific. But okay, yeah, maybe I'm understanding it wrong, and Amartashan is understanding it wrong. But people who agree with this, they are also the ones who understood it wrong and decided that meditation is the best we can provide to the world. I feel so casteism was both libertarian and socialist in weird ways. Horse fucking shoe. Merely saying one is Brahmin lineage won't be a casteist. Casteist would be if you're misbehaving. Yes, absolutely. Only understanding of Varna system in society can solve caste system. Yeah, by understanding what do you mean, uske upar bhi depend karta hai, because we are understanding it, and it seems like just a bunch of status group stuff that is inevitable, and bad behavior based on that is also inevitable. So we need repeated disruptions. One disruption is, of course, economics, and the other disruption is Hindu unity and stuff. I think the market forces do have an impact in decreasing casteism. Yes. Kushal Mehra is very Dumontian. Yes. No Hindu scripture elevates any caste to the highest, and for a casteist is one who self-elevates themselves and refuses to accept the interoperability of the four varnas. Well, the scriptures that say that there will be a nice life for him and not nice life, you have to behave badly towards them, etc. Societal failure, yeah, but also inevitable human flaws. This sounds like a workers union. um like Leviticus says, mixing colors is a sin. If a sin is a sin that requires death, do you see Christians following this? Yeah, incentives is everything ultimately. Away saying this is why I need decoloniality to some extent, and the way we are approaching this is a decolonial step. I don't think academics are blaming Vivekananda for claiming Eaststone's spirituality. Yes, I'm taking notes. I have to rewatch it many times and have to take more notes. These papers are weapons to fight. Yes. Everyone else was silent about the West claiming science is theirs. Don't think Varna is relevant anymore. Again, we need gurus to read. Yeah, Varna's is not relevant. For example, British calls 1857 a mutiny. Savarkar challenged it and called it a war of independence. So did Karl Marx, as far as I know. One Brahmin student from Tamil Nadu had filed the case even after being overly qualified. Congress government in Tamil Nadu Central were in huge trouble, even losing judicial battle against zamindars in Bihar. Okay, let's resume the paper now. Though, in fact, discriminatory practices, discriminatory pricing based on social or other distinction is advantageous if it allows one participant to appropriate some or all of the consumer surplus resulting from the transaction. A.C. Pigu in 1920 had already considered how discriminatory pricing might operate if agents could be grouped into sets distinguished by some practicable mark. And this always happens. People do negotiate. In some shops, for some things are obviously not negotiable. But if you're a complete fucking nobody and you go to a music shop today to buy a guitar, you're obviously going to pay higher than someone who goes to that shop frequently, or if you're a famous musician who goes to that shop frequently. Okay, for many reasons, of course, because that musician is going to say that, see, I got this great guitar from that nice little store who gave me a great discount. And that famous guitarist saying this to a bunch of students or his friends, family. He has a bigger circle. That means more to the guitar shop owner, of course. Whereas you will say good things about it only to your parents, maybe. No one gives a shit. Or more importantly, he's going to say what a great guitar this is. And that becomes very important, and all of his students maybe run to that store. So there's always differential pricing. He also thought that even in the absence of such a mark, it might be possible to establish ideal discrimination by detailed separate bargaining with every separate customer. Needless to say, both these strategies are found in South Asian market settings, precisely because the limited communications infrastructure limits the size of the market and almost makes information a free good. People have grown up together and effortlessly known a great deal about each other. Moving on to another aspect of Jajmani, the sharing systems and payments in kind that led Dumont to imagine that the village is a sort of cooperative. These systems of payment are easily amenable to economic explanation. They both provide. See, the problem with Dumont is that from time to time he is going on saying things that on the face of it, on the superficial topsoil level, let's say, seems to be a fact, but he's putting all of that onto religion. Okay, that's the problem of Dumont. That's the problematic aspect of Dumont's findings. These systems of payment are easily amenable to economic explanation. They both provide incentives and spread the risks resulting from unpredictable fluctuations in yields and prices. But let us return to Dumont. They both provide incentives and spread the risks resulting from unpredictable fluctuations in yields and prices. So Dumont says, quote, what is the principle behind what is called the Jajmani system? In the first place, it makes use of hereditary personal relationships to express the division of labor. Each family has a family of specialists at its disposal for each specialized task. Secondly, it regulates prestations and counter-prestations in a way which accords with custom. For the usual tasks, repayment is kind. It is not made individually for each particular prestation, but is spread over the whole year, as is natural for a permanent relationship in an agricultural setting. A fact which underlines the limited but effective solidarity which is thus set up between Jajman and Praja is that In many regions, those who are considered the main servants of the village enjoy an allotment of land from a communal fund set apart by their patrons. It is here that the division of labor that forms an integral part of the caste system may be most clearly understood. End quote. So now, Sumit Guha says, I cannot claim to be the first to say that the above quoted passage is full of misunderstandings. First of all, the division of labor existed and exists. See, was it the similarity between Dirks, Irfan Habib, Declan Quigley, Sumit Guha? All of them are insanely pissed off with Dumont. First of all, the division of labor existed and exists independently of these dyadic relations. Okay? Division of labor exists and exists independently of these dyadic relations. This is evidenced by the easy replacement of if you just imagine, if you replace these hereditary specialists occasioned by disputes, immigration, etc. Okay. This is evidenced by the easy replacement of hereditary specialists occasioned by disputes, immigration, etc. Okay. Clearly, then, the division of labor arises from the economic efficiency of specialization in most occupations. Specialists usually do a better job. Not Manusmriti. Secondly, the quantum of prestation or payment is seen by Dumont as practically fixed by immutable custom. But custom, as we shall see below, is continually contested and remade by cheating, evasion, flight, and violence deployed by both villagers and superior authorities. Finally, the allocation of land to village servants was not done by their patrons but by extra village authorities, typically the patrimonial state with capital S. I must remark that the division of labor is accepted uncritically by Dumont, yet his schema does not require any division of economic functions, only of the polluting functions, which must be relegated to specialists regardless of cost. If we admit additional division of labor aimed at securing higher productivity, we have already admitted economic considerations into the model of professional specialization. So you see, the horse fucking shoe theory is repeatedly uniting libertarians and Marxists, but it's the Marxists who have not been honest to their ideology, unlike Irfan Habib, and have used Dumont only to hate Hinduism because they did not have the best interests of the lower castes at heart. We do. We genuinely want to solve casteism because we love this country and this society. Why would the fuck we want a country where some of our homies behave badly for fucking no reason except birth with other homies of ours? Okay, we really want to solve casteism. If we admit, so Guha is pointing out, if we admit additional division of labor aimed at securing higher productivity, we have already admitted economic considerations into the model of professional specialization. Furthermore, the covert presence and periodic overt deployment of coercion implies that organizations are held together by something more than an unquestioning cooperative orientation to the fundamental values of the community. Okay. He's trolling now. अगर भाई मनुस्मृति पढ़ के ये सब हो रहा था तो भोसरी के कोवर्ट प्रेजेंस ऑफ कोअर्शन एंड पीरियोडिक ओवर्ट डिप्लॉयमेंट ऑफ कोअर्शन क्यों जरूरत पड़ रहा था भाई? सब मनुस्मृति मगअप करके क्यों नहीं आराम से सोसाइटी चलाने लगे? Again, if there is a general societal consensus around the idea of hierarchy, this by no means precludes efforts at changing the individual agent's rank in it. Oh fuck, this is Hitesh Ranjan Shandal's research, remember? Okay, सब कोई रैंक में उठना चाह रहा है बिकॉज तब इंसेंटिव था रैंक में ऊपर उठना, आज रैंक है अपने आप को दलित घोषणा करना. तो रिमेंबर अगेन, फेक जीनियोलॉजीज, फेक फैमिली बैकग्राउंड, हम उस कास्ट से आए हैं, हम उस देवता से आए हैं, कुछ दिन के लिए हम लोअर कास्ट बन गए थे, ये सब चुतियापा, ऑल ऑफ व्हिच वर बीइंग अटेस्टेड बाय द आईएएस क्वाजी आईएएस लाइक ब्राह्मण्स ऑफ yesteryears. So again, if there is a general societal consensus around the idea of hierarchy, this by no means precludes efforts at changing the individual agent's rank in it. And since the upward movement of some is equivalent to the downward displacement of others, such differences can only be settled by the deployment of socio-economic resources, not Manusmriti, expended in the means of coercion or the accessories of status building. Oh my god. Status building, RSS Kadalla, Max Weber has done so much for us. Oh my god. Anand is saying Marxists will never be honest. That would require them to. Everyone had guild groups. Yeah. Another and Rishi, इसमें भी ना मेरा एक opinion है. I'm not educated enough to say if this is right or not. Maybe someday I'll find out that other people have said it already. But the way our mode of social organizing, these guild-like things, birth-based guild-like things, remained and then were used as cosplaying fancy dress competitions today. आज का जो है वो तो state incentives के वजह से हो रहा है. But it stayed on longer because remember, we are the only society which has not faced the insane amounts of disruptions that every other society has gone through. Okay, we have not seen a gigantic economic disruption. Okay, like yeah, some amounts of capitalism, of course, in Mumbai, Chennai, Bengal presidency, Madras presidency, Bombay presidency. Okay, वहां पे थोड़ा disruption हुआ, कुछ इधर उधर हो गया, फिर अपने आप में एक सोसाइटी हो गया, एक casteism हो गया. बट मोर इंपॉर्टेंटली हर जगह में ना वो कंप्लीट कन्वर्जन जो हो गया था उसके वजह से कंप्लीट डिस्ट्रप्शन हो गया सोसाइटी का, ऑर्गेनाइजेशन का, ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल प्रिंसिपल्स का, इंसेंटिव स्ट्रक्चर्स का. वो भी हमारा नहीं हुआ, तो हमारा थोड़ा और लंबा खींच गया. खींचने के बाद भोसरी वालों ने आके उसको और इंसेंटिवाइज कर दिया. या दिस इज मैक्स वेबर ऑन स्टेरॉइड्स. Nina is focusing on semantics here. Why is Max Weber RSS ka dalla if he's even taking the opposite line of RSS? Yeah, good point. But he's actually RSS ka dalla because he says good things in the same way that RSS does. That yes, India was such a great country and stuff. Marxists want to preserve hierarchies after all. Yes, it's a great Bengali quote I came up with a few days back, for which I'm very proud of myself. But nobody knows it. Nobody has seen it. That I said it in Facebook that বেকারত্ব ঘুচে গেলে বামপন্থী বেকার হয়ে যাবে. ওকে, if unemployment is solved, the communist will become unemployed. Okay, we did during the British era. That's why the enormous transition from incredible diversity of guild types and goods to massive numbers becoming farmers. Yes, and not in the entirety of the country, of course, and also hence the newly branded, rigidified and more solidified castes, unlike the previous era. Yes, of course. Some people are more equal. This coffee is more coffee. But Indian system is entirely set up on Dumont. Yes. And everyone fucking agrees. Okay, let's continue with the paper now. So, bhai, status beta sab kuch bol diya. This paragraph was the most insane paragraph so far. I would like to read it once more. Furthermore, the covert presence and periodic overt deployment of coercion implies that organizations are held together by something more than an unquestioning cooperative orientation to the fundamental values of the community. Again, if there is a general societal consensus, he's saying if, okay, अगर है भी भोसरी के वैसा consensus कि हाँ हम सब मनुस्मृति पढ़ लिए हैं, अब ऐसा ही चलेगा, even then, this by no means precludes efforts at changing the individual agent's rank in it. Okay, मनुस्मृति पढ़ के कंसेंसस हो रहा है, फिर भी कुछ लोगों को लग रहा है नहीं अब चलो अब थोड़ा ऊपर जाते हैं जाति हायरार्की में. And since the upward movement of some is equivalent to the downward displacement of others, such differences can only be settled by the deployment of socio-economic resources expended in the means of coercion or the accessories of status building. In short, the presence of hierarchical organizations does not exclude the possibility of individuals nonetheless pursuing their own ends by the deployment of resources calculated as adequate to their ends. Holy shit. Which is to say, it does not exclude either individualistic rationality or calculation. Yehi hai the problem with thinking the world is either good or evil, and we must move beyond good and evil and read Nietzsche, Pierre Bourdieu and René Girard as soon as possible. तो ये जो इडनिस्ट व्यू है ऑफ हिंदू सोसाइटी और द इनसेन कॉमी व्यू है ऑफ हिंदू सोसाइटी के सब भोसरी वाले थे, सब अपने मतलब मरने के बाद सिर्फ बीबियों को जलाते फिर रहे थे और सिर्फ कैस्टिज्म कर रहे थे, सबको गाली दे रहे थे, थूक रहे थे मुंह पे एटसेट्रा. यही चल रहा था. और द ऑपोजिट साइड दैट नो वन हैड एनी प्रॉब्लम्स विद एनीवन एवर. बोथ आर एब्सोल्युटली हॉटशिट आइडियाज. देयर वाज individualistic rationality and calculation. And like I was saying yesterday, भाई अगर इंडिविजुअलिज्म का कोई भी गुरुत्व नहीं रहता सोसाइटी में, तो भाई इतने सारे देवता नहीं लगते, कुल देवता ग्राम देवता होने के बाद एक इष्ट देवता नहीं रहता. इंडिविजुअलिज्म इज चेरिश्ड, celebrated in Indian society, obviously not at the cost of the main group or society. Okay, so the famous phrase "one for all for one." Okay, the group protects the individuality of the person, and the individual also dedicates himself to doing good things in his own fucking way for the group. If I may digress, I can also point out that Dumont and others were theorizing in the 20th century when economic activity, far from being conducted between myriads of atomized, anonymous individuals, was largely ordered by complex and hierarchical corporate organizations which engaged strategically with each other and which were in practice constituted of numerous small scale entities with their own unwritten norms and customs. By the way, this guy's PhD is in fucking history. See what a great understanding of economics he has. I guess historical economics or economic history may be his subject. I wonder what his thesis is. Like, can someone Google and point out what Sumit Guha's PhD was in, or what was his thesis paper? But this has not precluded other maximizing behavior. Maximizing behavior, bhai bhosli ke hamara kyun band hoga? So this has not precluded either maximizing behavior by individuals within the setting of targeted discrimination by groups. So to conclude, there is nothing about the observable functioning of village service situations that requires us to turn to the allegedly eternal religious foundations of Indian civilization for an explanation. Oh my God. This is a quote for days. Let's just put this in the comment section for fun. To conclude, there is nothing about the observable functioning of village service institutions that requires us to turn the allegedly eternal religious foundations of Indian civilization for an explanation. It has nothing to do with those things. Did Jajmani have a history? For Dumont, Jajmani, like the Hindu tradition, was practically timeless. It had no history. His source, W.H. Weiser, the missionary anthropologist, thought it had a history, and so have several later scholars. Weiser, who studied a solitary North Indian village from the 1920s, is usually credited with being the first scholar to formulate the idea of a Jajmani as an organized system and one with ancient roots in Indic civilization. But unlike Dumont, Weiser, the missionary anthropologist, believed that what he described in Karimpur was a relic of an ancient social organization and therefore quite recent. In 1958, W.H. Weiser wrote, the Hindu Jajmani system as it stands today in Karimpur is a disintegrated form of the ancient village commune. The Hindu Jajmani system as it stands today in Karimpur is ancient in that it recognizes the claims of the different occupational groups to a share of the earnings of the village as a whole, but it is not ancient in its detailed form as prescribed in the preceding pages. Clearly, end quote. Clearly, Weiser, the missionary anthropologist, believed that something approximating to the Western Indian Baluta system had existed almost until his arrival. This had then disintegrated to generate Jajmani. In this respect, he would agree with Peter Mayer, whose detailed analysis of the evidence on Jajmani in English language sources was published in 1993. Mayer traced the earliest English mention of Jajmani to Yule and Bernal's Hobson Jobson of 1855. A complete description of a dyadic relationship akin to that depicted by Weiser, the missionary anthropologist, was found in E.A.H. Blunt's census report of 1911 for the United Provinces, meaning UP, okay? Ek bar for clarification of everyone, let's look at the exact definition of dyadic relations, okay? Dyadic means, okay, yeah, so between two people or two things or a couple, etc., okay? दोनों के बीच में. तो Peter Mayer also presented a novel view of Jajmani. He saw it as a reaction by various service groups to new opportunities and pressures arising out of British rule and associated changes in the urban and rural economies. Notably, he saw it as resulting from the accelerated breakup of collective village tenures in which the landholding body collectively paid the land tax and regulated the services of the various village servants. The quote-unquote exclusive right to serve individual families of patrons that came to be called Jajmani, he speculatively suggests, may have originated no later than the settlement of British civil servants and others in the towns of North India. He is also at pains to confine it to northern India and to distinguish it and its precursors from the village servant systems of Indian peninsula. Okay, north south divide यहाँ पे बना लिया है ये लोगों ने. He concludes that Jajmani was quote unquote probably in widespread existence in Uttar Pradesh for less than 30 years when Blunt first described it in 1911. Blunt continued to examine the issue of caste, though through subsequent decades. He concluded that occupational castes, some of whom exercised traditional claims upon judgmans, actually originated in artisanal guilds of the first millennium CE and would in the 20th century move towards trade unionism irrespective of caste. आनंद श्रीधर कहां पे है? See, ट्रेड यूनियनिज्म होगा ही जब जब कास्ट होगा. An identical impulse created the trade guilds, the functional castes, and the 20th century landholders associations and Mazdoor Sabhas, workers associations, namely the desire of men with common interests to unite for the protection of those interests. Okay, यही तो है guild आज का, Tollywood guild, union, everything, association, workers association, etc. So, thus, the author of perhaps the only large-scale survey of caste in the Middle Gangetic Plains saw not merely Jajmani but all intercaste economic relations generally as exclusively economic in nature. देखो भाई, कितना कितना चुतियापा हमको सिखाया गया है about casteism forever and ever. Okay, Guha's thesis was on Maharashtra's colonial economics. He writes extensively about Maharashtra. I should read this. Honestly, free and dynamic trade guilds are the purest actionable form of libertarianism. An identical impulse created trade guilds, the functional castes, and the 20th century landholders associations and Mazdoor Sabhas or workers associations, namely the desire of men with common interests to unite for the protection of those interests. ये है कास्ट और उसके बेसिस पे तुम्हारा एक स्टेटस होगा कि तुम कितना कल्चरल कैपिटल अक्वायर कर पाते हो, डिपेंडिंग ऑन योर amount of earning, and depending also your earning will depend upon how important your service, that job you do, is to society. Of course, these things are, this is how it's related. So it's not like it has nothing to do with class. It does have a bit to do with economics, of course, but it's not just economics. The caste is not just economics, but you see these things, it's involved with status, economics, and workers guild and stuff. Thus, the author of perhaps the only large-scale survey of caste in the Middle Gangetic Plains, when I say it has something to do with economics or nothing to do with economics, I mean class. So castes are castes; they are not class entirely. Thus, the author of perhaps the only large-scale survey of caste in the Middle Gangetic Plains saw not merely Jajmani but all intercaste economic relations generally as exclusively economic in nature. Thus, the distance of this from the Dumontian idea of the religious encompassing the economic need hardly be stressed. Okay, Brahmins controlling the society is absolutely destroyed in this sentence. Of course, after many times already being done by Irfan Habib, Dirks, Declan Quigley, Dayapati Roy. Now, Dr. Sumit Guha, professor of history at University of Texas Austin. The distance of this fact from the Dumontian idea of the religious encompassing the economic need hardly be stressed. Okay, so in other words, the religious does not encompass the economic in our society, just like any other society. Migrants, markets, and institutions. Peter Mayer's emphasis on changing regionally diverse and entrepreneurial nature of the inter-household relations is well taken and is supported by a valuable ethnographic source, the report of the Committee on Customary Rights to Scavenging, published by the Government of India in 1966. The committee corresponded with a number of state governments and also made local inquiries in many parts of northern and southern India before submitting its report in 1966. The quote-unquote customary right described had all the features of what is referred to as Jajmani. One particular scavenger acquires a right to clean such latrines as against another scavenger. We will get into this. But more importantly, just sort of a shout out, remember all these papers are being sent to me by mysterious sociologist. And he is coming to our podcast, hiding his face anonymously. Who's to blame for this? M Shastri, stop giving out spoilers to my plans. यही मेरे कल का पेपर का plan है. Though I'm tomorrow going to a nice discussion where the co-author of the book on Bangladeshi Hindus with Deep Haldar, co-author Dr. Abhishek বিশ্বাস and Dr. Kaushik Gangopadhyay will be. I'm going to such an event. आज भी एक बढ़िया event था with another sociologist, वो cancel हो गया. तो yes, I have that paper. Mysterious sociologist sent this to me months back. We are going to get into it very soon, either tomorrow or day after tomorrow. Okay, but guys, can you think why are these? No, Anand. Not because of that. Just if he had a nice post in a nice university, even then he could do it. He doesn't have job security at the moment. If he comes out as with this identity, like Deep Haldar now has, he is not going to progress in his career anymore. He is going to have to teach in वो Center for Indic Studies and stuff. वो खराब तो नहीं है, मगर credential research का तो एक value है. We can now conclude that at least. वो कैसे होगा? So Anand Singh, the system, yes, the famous, the fabled system, the proverbial. So one particular scavenger acquires a right to clean such latrines as against another scavenger, okay? Job security. In small towns, he is generally paid in kind, a daily roti, and some prerequisites like food or clothes, etc. on some special occasions like births, marriages, deaths, etc., varying with the status of the householder. Often in bigger towns, he is also paid partially in cash, and in cities, he is generally paid only in cash. It is also that in times of need, they sell or mortgage their rights to other scavengers in the same manner as one does with one's property. Where customary rights exist in the old form, the householder can change his scavenger only with the consent of the latter. Scavenger ka consent. Oh my God. Raja Manu ne ye sab kya likh diya? In such cases, the old scavenger enters into a deal with the new one who pays the former some amount according to the status of the householder. These transactions in common parlance are known as the selling of a particular brith. And see, we think our ancients were idiots, nice people doing meditation all day. So, and someone was telling me, in our live stream, I Anand Sridhar or Mr. Sociologist himself, that this is what kind of happens in Gujarat as well, that the Gujaratis who do apply for government jobs, for these sorts of jobs, they are not actually doing those jobs themselves. They are actually hiring 3 people under them to do those jobs for lesser money. So the status of human feces in the purity pollution schema must be obvious. He is trolling now. If Jajmani was an institution designed to cope with this and other polluting substances, it should have been present almost everywhere. But contrary to Dumont's belief that Jajmani was more or less universal in India, the committee found the old form, or what the anthropological literature described as Jajmani, did not extend even to eastern Uttar Pradesh. It was found in the west and center of that state, in Rajasthan, in Madhya Pradesh, excluding the eastern Mahakoshal, present Chhattisgarh region, mainly in the Saurashtra region of Gujarat, in Punjab, and in predominantly Muslim areas of Jammu and Kashmir. It was also found as a recent importation in the Telangana districts of Andhra Pradesh and parts of Marathwada in eastern Maharashtra. तो भाई मनुस्मृति अगर सब पढ़ रहे हैं, फॉलो काहे भोसरी के सिर्फ कुछ जगहों में हो रहा है? The committee also sought to discover the origins of the system. It remarked on the fact that indoor latrines were few in the countryside and had usually belonged to people of high status who would not relieve themselves al fresco, meaning randomly anywhere. These were cleaned by the village sweepers, who, like other rural servants, had a claim in each harvest. The quantity of food grains given to them was fixed according to the status of the judgman. Status, बार बार ये word आ रहा है, status. Max Weber का काम है ये. By the way, his name is Max, not Max Weber, okay? It's Max Weber. This type of Jajmani system still prevails in many areas. Apart from food grains and in some cases land, these artisans also got new or old clothes annually and prerequisites on ceremonial occasions like births and marriages and during festivals. The committee plausibly suggested that wealthy rural households gradually moved to the towns and accompanied by their servants The latter then sought to monopolize their patrons by the custom described above. Long distance migration from areas where the practice was prevalent could also transfer the usage. Thus, transfer the usage, भाई क्या genius है मनुस्मृति में, हाँ? सब कुछ मनुस्मृति में था और धर्मशास्त्र में था. Thus, numbers of Balmikis from western Uttar Pradesh and present-day Haryana migrated to the old Hyderabad state and divided the growing urban areas into beats held under customary law. Older local groups may have withdrawn or been bought out. In Marathwada also, there is no local scavenging caste except a few Muslim sheikhs. Sheikhs. Mahars do only sweeping work. Scavengers from North India purchased brits from local scavengers, generally Muslim sheikhs. It is evident that economic calculation was very much present in this transaction. Oh my god, they were not following Manusmriti. Nor indeed was rent seeking and finding unknown. Rent seeking and finding, okay, bracket mein diya hai finding. Rent seeking and finding was not unknown. In the town of Vidisha, Madhya Pradesh, there were, quote, only 18 bhangis having Brit Jajmani. Subsequently, it was revealed that all of them had employed servants, usually municipal sweepers, not having their own Brits for cleaning private latrines. The latter are only allowed to take rotis from households served by them. It was alleged that if the cash income from the family served by a tenant scavenger was, say, rupees 25 paisa, the ilakedar would give only rupees 2 paisa to the servant and pocket the rest of the money. Yeah, that's it. That is what I just gave an example of in Gujarat's government service and stuff. A lot of people who seek these jobs in Gujarat who are not actually doing those jobs. And even today, you will see वो स्कैवेंजिंग के लिए, आई मीन वो म्यूनिसिपल स्वीपर्स एंड ऑल के लिए उसके सामने बढ़िया लाइन रहता है. There were also entrepreneurs who acquired monopolies in newly urbanizing areas. These intermediaries, okay? There were also entrepreneurs who acquired monopolies in newly urbanizing areas. क्योंकि मैक्स वेबर ने तो बोला है कि इंडिया is the only is a country which had the least amount of anti-crematism in the whole world. Anti-crematism means हर सोसाइटी में थोड़ा बहुत ये रहता है, हाँ पैसा क्या है, हाथ की महल, etc. That is called anti-crematism. India had least amount of that. So these intermediaries or contractors, by their shrewdness or cleverness, entered into negotiations with new colonizers or developers and set up new jagirs. This was also a channel for the investment of capital. The buyers of Brits in Marathwada were often financed by Balmiki capitalists in either. Oh my god, that's a phrase I never thought I would hear. Balmiki capitalists. This sounds sounds like a great name for a band, no? Hi, we are the Balmiki capitalists. We play only Ambedkarite metal. So, financed by Balmiki capitalists in Hyderabad at high rates of interest. Despite so much evidence for adaptation to economic opportunity, the committee persisted in seeing disputes between householders and scavengers as a recent departure from traditional mutualism and ancient harmony. Okay? The committee persisted in seeing disputes between householders and scavengers as a recent departure from traditional mutualism and ancient harmony. This was unsupported by any evidence. And in fact, as we shall see below, the earliest records of this system are records of disputes and conflicts. Okay? वो कमिटी बोल रहा है कि भाई पहले बहुत बढ़िया था, सब लोगों में एकदम भाईचारा था, हाल ही में ये लोग भोसड़ी वाले बन गए हैं. And Sumit Guha is pointing out that this is unsupported by any evidence. As we shall see below, the earliest records of this system are records full of disputes and conflicts. Lol. Much of the evidence here thus supports Peter Mayer's contention that the Jajmani system was in many ways an innovation. Simon Commander, like Mayer, is skeptical of the cultural explanations of the relationships and prefers to view them as a form of labor relation, a type of peace-rated labor payment in kind, which goes into decline in the later colonial era as a consequence of migration, rising prices, and growing pressure on the land, a view not supported by the evidence cited above. Oh. Mayer is in fact engaged in attempt to portray Jajmani as a novel and transitional relationship of service and payment, one which lasted little more than half a century, and whose rise and decay may both be located within the colonial era. He also confines his analysis to North India, deprecating the attempts made by Beidelman and others, including Weiser, to assimilate the North Indian dyadic relationships with the village servant systems found in much of southern and western India. Radical though Mayer and Commander's critiques of Jajmani as an ancient system may be, yet they now see what a brilliant research this Sumit Guha has done. See what a brilliant scholar he is. He's pointing out that yes, mayor and commanders' critiques of Jajmani as an ancient system is probably correct, but then they fall into the same trap set by हमारे वो missionary anthropologist Weiser in subscribing to the idea that village community and village servant system was an ancient functional organization whose origins are presumably lost in the mists of time. The rest of this paper will attempt a history of that organization itself. Now, a bit of break and a sip of coffee. Ajju is saying, what I meant is that they are still contracted by the municipality to clean up gutters when there are blockages. News of them dying in cleaning gutters is still part of the news in Mumbai. Yes. Because of the general horseshit nature of our public infrastructure, which is horseshit because of our babus. They would get stipends from kings and would live with majority of society. Obviously, the problem is Westerners superimpose Greek citizens to Indian Kshatriyas. Yeah, Balmiki capitalist. Okay. So let's continue. The village servant system from the 17th to the 20th century. This is the name of the paper, by the way. The late H.K. Fukuzawa was perhaps the earliest scholar to attack the issue of Baluta and Jajmani in the pre-colonial period and to use contemporary sources rather than the conveniently accessible colonial reconstructions of the period. He cogently warned that what is taken as traditional or extant from time immemorial may actually have developed in the very recent past. As Fukuzawa's article is readily available, it is unnecessary for me to do more than list his main conclusions. Firstly, he showed that the functionaries were maintained by the village as a territorial whole, thus conforming the village servant rather than the Jajmani type of relation. He writes, there was one Baluta Watan for every occupation in a village. Division of a Watan did not increase its number. Each sharer of the divided Watan was considered, or Watan, I don't know how to pronounce this. Division of a Watan did not increase its number. Each sharer of the divided Watan was considered to have a fraction of it, okay? Each sharer of the divided Watan was considered to have a fraction of it. Moreover, what was divided was not the sphere of service, but the emoluments from the Watan. Therefore, in the process of division of a Watan, the related Baluta servants were not transformed from being the servants of the village to becoming the servants of certain specific families. But Fukuzawa continues, they were differentiated into those who held their posts as a patrimony or Watan and those who were sojourners without such rights. Secondly, there were Brahmins functioning as priests who had exclusive claims to serve specific castes but not the village as a whole. These households could be seen as having a Jajmani relation to those Brahmins. Carnivorous villagers would have a Jajmani relation with the Maulana, a functionary probably added in western Maharashtra under the sultanates of Ahmednagar and Bijapur, circa 1500 to 1650 AD. Writing in 1819, Thomas Coates described this functionary as existing in many villages. Quote, the Mohammedan sacrificer kills the sheep at sacrifices and festivals. His wages are a portion of grain and straw. End quote. H. Mann found the institution still in place a century later. Fukuzawa traced a reference to the village servant system in Max Weber, who had termed it demiurgic. Weber believed that Indian villages had allotted garden land and grazing common to craftsmen, temple priests, barbers, laundrymen, and all kinds of laborers belonging to the village establishment. They hold on a demiurgic basis. That is, they are not paid for their work in detail but stand in the service of the community in return for a share in the land or in the harvest. What these village-centered models forget is that the community itself stood in the service of a demanding and peremptory set of overlords. Okay? What these village-centered models forget is that the community itself stood in the service of a demanding and peremptory set of overlords. Arbitrary demands for money, labor service, and produce were an inescapable feature of rural and urban life for most people. Forced labor for the needs of officials and other gentry was a heavy and erratic burden, and much of the energy of quote-unquote village servants was in fact expended in rendering this government service so as to prevent random villagers being conscripted for it. this was, and these things also go on forever and after in any society. Like just today, a relative of mine was saying that she got into an auto, and the auto wala was very proudly saying that I ride auto all day, but during the night I I work for a famous, I'm not going to name obviously, a famous Trinamool person. He works in real estate and stuff. I get called randomly in the middle of the night and I have to go. So the question arises, first of all, why is a situation like that where he is called in the middle of the night and he has to go? Secondly, what kind of real estate production or work asks you to call up an auto wala in the middle of the night? No points for guessing, guys. This was evident when Sykes surveyed Western Maharashtra in 1825 through 29. Quote, occasionally the answer to my inquiries respecting the duties of the Mahars was that they were to do everything they were ordered, whether by the Patil, the village corporation, or by the government. So for instance, when Nimbalkar of Karmalle had one of his pagas of horse stationed near Wangi, the Mahars worked gratuitously for 6 months in the year in the stables. On the removal of the paga, Nimbalkar levied a tax on the Mahars in place of 6 months stable work, but did not remit any of their ordinary duties. Lol. See, this is now where communism comes into the forefront, and the libertarianish aspect of the system takes a backstage. In another township, the Mahars had earlier had the specific duties of gratuitously supplying all government officers who came into the district, and partly also the hill forts, with dry wood and grass. These demands continued under British rule, ending perhaps only with the introduction of motor transport. Disruption, बड़ा disruption होगा, ये सब चीज बंद हो जाएगा. Thus, S.J. Thackeray, principal collector. Oh, this is not Thackeray, this is Thackeray, like William Makepeace Thackeray, right? Yeah, this is a British surname. Thus, S.J. Thackeray, principal collector, wrote from Dharwad in 1824. As very few coolies are to be found here, and the class of dhairs and other pariahs is quite insufficient to supply the demand, the Amildar's peons often press into servicemen who have never carried loads in their lives until the officers of our government impressed them. Okay, so you see, multiple jobs and stuff, upskilling and ye sab ho raha hai tab bhi. When 200 or 300 coolies are required and only a day's notice is given for procuring them, the peons often seize upon inhabitants, with the exception of Brahmins and saukars, bankers, indiscriminately, drive them in a herd to the place of rendezvous, and pen them like cattle until the arrival of the baggage. This is how caste system benefited the ideas of castes benefited British as well. Thackeray sought to revive what he believed was old usage and issued a proclamation requiring that, quote, the village officer is on no account to press the riots or roots peasants for coolies, but is to procure them without violence from the lower classes of Bedurs, Dhairs, Dhungurs, and other similar castes accustomed to carry burdens. Should there be no sufficient number of such persons, the deficiency shall be supplied from the neighboring villages. End quote. It is evident that the colonial administration was thus reinforcing and reviving a system of village responsibility that would in turn reinforce the Baluta system. If the upper caste villagers did not maintain an adequate number of village servants for such occasions, they risked being violently conscripted to replace them. तो तुम पालो coolies, नहीं तो भोसड़ी का तुमको खुद जाना पड़ेगा. Landless and poor households were often selectively burdened by such exactions. For example, in the 1820s, groups of Bhil tribals were induced to come down from the hills and settle near the villages in Khandesh, North Maharashtra. Colonial officials believed that they would be integrated into the village servant system and live peacefully thereafter, as they had quote-unquote traditionally done. The struggle over what was traditional and customary now began, and the officer responsible for their resettlement warned that oppression could force them back into outlawry. He recommended that services expected to be performed by Bhils of the plains in the vicinity of Hindu villages in consideration of grants of land required to be more strictly defined. No Bhil should be compelled to labor or forced to plow for less than Hindu laborers, or for less wages than other ploughmen receive. The remuneration, if in money, grain, or clothes, should be distinctly specified. Another most serious grievance is that in a village, however well populated, not a cart, a bullock, a driver, guide, or begari, forced laborer, will be furnished by the native local authorities from the caste inhabitants, whilst any can possibly why when whilst any can possibly be pressed from the limited resources of the wretched bheels at and in the neighborhood of the village. अगर भील है तो उनको यूज करो. Such tussles did not only occur with socially alien groups like the bheels, they were a did not only occur with socially alien groups like the bheels, they were a general feature of the times when the agrarian order was recovering from war or famine. See, Sumit Guha is being so fair. He's saying, that yes, these were bad things happening, but these were general features of those times because it was an agrarian order which was recovering from war or famine. Ajju, yes, Bala Thackeray's, I think, grandfather was a fan of William Makepeace Thackeray, for which they just adopted the name Thackeray, lol. This was the case in Pune district around 1710 when Pilaji Jadhav, an important official of the Maratha state, wrote to the village officers of the region, quote, "You reported that your province had long been desolate, but that it was now fortunately being resettled once again, and all the villages was populated once more. Abad Rahetu. The holders of the 12 balutas had all returned to the villages, but they began demanding exorbitant amounts in the name of customary dues. They demanded everything you, the farmers, possessed on account of dues. So you asked us to fix the dues. So we collected everyone and considered past usage and fixed the customs. Everyone is now to conform to this settlement." End quote. Such pronouncements may have reduced conflicts, but conflict was always present. And record as individuals felt that they could exploit some fresh advantage. Yahi to hoga. I quote one example from the surviving records of the period. In the mid-18th century, Ranoji, the headman of a village near Saswad or Saswad, complained of the novel and excessive demands made by the village astrologer Brahman Joshi. He stated that his functionary had hitherto accepted various small cash payments from poorer families in lieu of the shawl he was entitled to receiving for officiating at weddings. Okay. He stated, this is hilarious. In the mid-18th century, Ranoji, the headman of a village near Saswad, complained of the novel and excessive demands made by the village astrologer Brahmin Joshi. He stated that this functionary, the Joshi, had hitherto accepted various small cash payments from poorer families in lieu of the shawl he was entitled to receive for officiating at weddings. But he was now forcibly extracting a shawl from everyone. Again, he had formerly received baluta dues after the paying capacity of the farmer. The yield of the field and the quality of the season had all been taken into account. In other words, he had bargained from a position of weakness. But now he simply sent his Rangadi slave woman to the fields with a horse, and she took as large a bundle as she wanted and loaded it on the horse. If the farmer protested, she abused him vilely. The slave woman of the Brahman Joshi is abusing the farmer. So you see, proximity to power is everything. When the headman had gone to speak with the Joshi about this, the latter had threatened to beat him with a stick. The change in behavior can be explained by the fact that the Joshi was now connected by marriage to the hereditary officers of the subdivision. Clearly, again, proximity to power. Clearly, he was emboldened by his new alliance to enlarge his prerequisites beyond the earlier customary level. तो भोसरी के कहाँ मनुस्मृति, कोई कहीं पे कोई मनुस्मृति को मतलब याद भी नहीं रख रहा है. The fact of constant, if less dramatic, dickering over the quantity and quality of payments was suggested by W.H. Sykes, who traveled through Western Maharashtra for 4 years, 1825 through 1829, in his capacity as statistical reporter to the government of Bombay, and made minute inquiries in dozens of villages. Quote, "Very rarely could I get either farmer or bulutedar to state specifically what the one gave and the other was entitled to receive. It depended very much upon the crops and also upon the extent of services performed or each individual cultivator." End quote. He was told by farmers in many parts of the region that they surrendered a quarter of the crop on account of baluta and other dues in kind. Occasionally, such friction erupted into full-scale confrontation. So, for instance, the dispute between the Mahars of Rak and its headman went up to the great noble Fateh Singh Bhosle. Oh, so Fateh Singh Bhosle, I guess. क्या नाम लिखा है भाई? Fateh Singh Bhosle in 1738 and was settled only at his discretion. The document enumerated the dues and duties of the Mahars on various occasions and ordered both sides to conform. Even religious functions were open to contest. Thus, in 1754, the Mahars of Saswad contested the right of the monks to carry an earthen pot around the village as a part of the rite of exorcism. They were asked to produce evidence from the neighboring villages that Mahars did indeed have such rights. They sought to do so, and then realized that this was against the usage of the country and withdrew their claims. Country meaning village. These two rival low caste communities were often used to curb each other. In Sarola Kasar, a village in Ahmednagar district, the villagers replaced the hereditary Mahars with monks at some time in the 1920s. Oh shit. Mahars and monks ke beech mein bawal chal raha hai. So we may see that a good deal more than agreement on fundamental values, so-called fundamental values, Manusmriti, etc. So we see that a good deal more than agreement on fundamental values was needed to ensure the sharing of the grain heap that Neil, Dumont and others would see as a spontaneous social process shaped by fundamental spiritual values. Okay? और यहाँ पे मांग और महार बवाल कर रहे हैं. This paper is insane. Oh my god. More extensive monetization, the gradual distinction of forced labor for government purposes and social protests by the Dalit classes marked relations between farmers and village servants by the early 20th century. This tension forms a major theme in a oh my god. Shit. Farmer or village servant ke beech bawal. This tension forms a major theme in an early classic of Maharashtrian rural sociology. T.N. Atre's Garnvgada or Gada, which is, however, written exclusively from the landholder's point of view. Atre, a middle-ranking colonial official with many decades' experience, states that undressed rural grievances were advertised by the poisoning of cattle. और कुछ नहीं मिला, जाके खुन्नस निकाल दिया भोसरी के गाय के ऊपर. If such cases became frequent in a village, then the government authorities temporarily confiscated the Mahar's patrimony on the assumption that they were behind the poisonings. Atre also describes how the district officers had, under Section 18 of the Watan Act, to assemble panchayats headed by the district collector in order to settle these disputes. If the panchayat failed to reach a decision within 7 days, then the collector gave a binding award. Atre also wrote that the Mahars now only rendered free service to important people, such as the headman, the district hereditary officers, and a few big farmers, and that too after they had been sought out and summoned. Why is Sumit Guha not head of department in any sociology faculty in India? Or history even. The collection of customary dues is presented as a deeply conflict-ridden process. For example, he describes how village watchmen always went in bands to confront the farmer in his field. Why isn't this guy in any even Indian private institution? Why isn't he in any Indian think tank? The collection of customary dues is presented as a deeply conflict-ridden process. For example, he describes how village watchmen always went in bands to confront the farmer in his field. Quote, going in a band means that argument, pressure and threat are deployed. So you see, वो रात को real estate का आदमी क्यों एक ऑटो वाला को बुलाता है? This is what. Going in a band means that argument, pressure and threat are deployed. To sum up, claims of entitlement, friendly pleas, begging, flattery and pilferage follow each other like beads on the same thread. Aha, poetic हो गया अचानक. तो claims of entitlement, friendly pleas, begging, flattery and pilferage, sam dam dand bhed, follow each other like beads on the same thread. If caught pilfering by an enraged farmer, Atre continues, the landless castes appeased him by saying, quote, Bali Raja, we are your footwear. How can we fill our stomachs? If that does not make him subside, these people say, well, well, is it thus? And utter words importing bloodshed and mayhem. The poor farmer, Kunbi, fears that they may fulfill their threats by theft, by arson, or by poisoning his cattle. So he perforce allows them to carry away what they have already pilfered. End quote. Shit. Atre presents a vivid but one-sided view of the situation. In reality, here as in North India, the balance of power was tilted in favor of the landowners, and the 20th century saw a steady decline in the dues received by village servants. The Gokhale Institute of Pune pioneered rural surveys in Western India in the 1930s and has maintained a fine tradition of intensive village studies. M.B. Jagtap worked on the first survey of Y subdivision in 1936 through 38 and on resurveys in 1942 through 1943, 1944 to 45, 59 to 60, and then 66 to 67. He lived mainly in his study villages from 1935 through 1952. To 1952, not through, so not the entire time. His study of these villages through 30 years was published in 1970. क्या काम करते थे लोग? Already by the 1930s, there were several villages without balutedars now, and others where some functions were performed by craftsmen from elsewhere for cash payment. By the 1950s, some balutedars had also stopped asking for baluta and preferred to work for cash payment. Jagtap, and then of course inflation starts going up, and of course GDP grows up. Jagtap notes that the baluta system was more completely preserved in villages like Gulumb, away from the main roads, which depended more on local supplies and services. Of course, no economic disruption is going on there. In 1936 through 37, 10.98% of the main food grain crops was paid out to balutedars in Gulumb, as against a low of 5.54% in well-connected Ozarde or Ozard. The average for 3 villages was 7.04%. We may recollect that in the 1820s, Sykes had been told that 25% of the crop was paid out as dues in kind. By 1959 through 1960, the share had fallen to 3.69%, and as food prices rose sharply in the 1960s, because of our socialism, to a negligible 1.83% in 1966 through 67. Jagtap explained this by the stoppage of payments to balutedars who were no longer needed, and the employment of craftsmen on a cash basis as required. Technological change also made it profitable to displace some. Pumps replaced leather buckets in irrigation, and the services of the leather worker came to an end. For example, okay. So largest proportionate reduction pays Dumont in payments to sacred functionaries. फिर से Dumont को troll कर रहा है. The largest proportionate reduction was in payments to sacred functionaries. और उसके लिए ब्रैकेट में लिख दिया कि देखो, remember what Dumont said? देखो, अगर Dumont को फॉलो कर रहे थे तो भाई सबसे कम पेमेंट रिडक्शन इन पेमेंट सेक्रेट फंक्शनरी को काहे हुआ? ओह माय गॉड. अचानक साइड में से डुमो का नाम घुसा दिया सिर्फ ट्रोल करने के लिए. यस आनंद, यस, दिस इज ट्रू एंथ्रोपोलॉजी. इसके लिए ही तो हम मतलब फंड करते हैं हमारे टैक्स के पैसे से. बट आनंद, सिंस यू आर लाइकिंग दिस पेपर, यू विल एब्सोल्युटली लव यस्टरडेज पेपर एज वेल. निकोलस बी डर्क्स's पेपर yesterday. Okay, there also we had to repeatedly exclaim that, "Arey bhai, this is what we fund people for. This is true historical anthropology." You won't believe what a brilliant job he has done yesterday, and mainly with South India. एग्जाम के टाइम इतना देर पढ़ाई करता तो जे वो वॉचमैन नहीं था. वतन मेरा वतन का वतन. Okay, so वतन. By the way, it is environmentalists aka commie allies that extend the immense misery of sewage cleaners. In Pune, they stalled construction of STP. अरे भाई, इंटरेस्टिंग, ये भोसड़ी के कम्युनिस्ट हमेशा हर जगह पे चुतिया सेम काम करते हैं. I don't remember if I've told you this example. I used to discuss this in my channel earlier on. That there's a place, very famous sea beach in West Bengal, called Bokhali. Okay. The most famous is Digha, Mondarmoni, etc. The other famous one is Bokhali. It's in a little different direction. So on the way to Bokhali, you have to cross a river called Hatania Doania. Okay. So that Hatania Doania has a bridge over it only now, even though people have been going to Bokhali as tourists for decades and decades. The last time I went to Bokhali was in 2016 or 17 early on my bike. I've been to Bokhali on my bike 2 times and many times as a kid, even once I reached college as well. It's a very famous beach hangout for all kids in South Bengal. So I had to put up my bike once on a small boat, and after that people told me that, idiot, don't ever put your bike on a boat, it might just sink. Put it on those gigantic trawlers. Okay. But which are rare in the day, so I had to put it up in a trawler, and they take up trucks and cars, etc. You have to wait for these things to cross that one river. Because of that one inconvenience, Bokhali has not developed or become as popular as Digha. Okay. Although Bokhali is actually closer to a lot of South Bengal areas, people would find it more affordable to go to Bokhali. What was the excuse for not building that bridge? The boatmen will lose their professions. Okay. So again, what do these unknowingly unconscious casteist communities end up doing? They prefer that hereditarily boatmen's kids become boatmen. Their services are guaranteed in that fucking boat driving profession. Okay. And on the other hand, Bokhali remains less developed. Whereas if it had had a bridge decades back, it could be a much developed state, and the boatman's son would have some other fucking job in that area. A concept unthinkable for a commie. Rather, it would be interesting to see what was property rights prior to British colonization. Guha suggests property right was different prior to British. Castes of the mind, yes. This one and the yesterday's paper. When can we have papers like that again? A few days later, as soon as possible. Basically, the paper that was mentioned by M. Shastri a while back. Okay, serving barbarians to save dharma, etc. And let me tell you about another sociologist. Okay, he is sort of mysterious sociologist on steroids. Okay, mysterious sociologist talks about him as if he's some sort of deity and stuff. Okay, now I'm in contact with him. He's also not going to ever come on my podcast because it will taint his career, and because he also does not have any professional, let's say, opportunities in India. He is in a very, very elite institution elsewhere. So he has also now sent me 2 insanely fascinating papers. Okay, I have been sending my live streams to him for the last few days. So his papers are also going to be fucking insane. Okay, he is mysterious sociologist on 100x. Okay, he's that qualified actually. He has that many publications and stuff. And maybe someday you will know his name. Maybe you will never know his name if this is how our government works. But these are the people who will have to work behind the shadows. All Indians should read Plato's Republic. Socrates exposed Marxism before Marx. By the way, fortunately or unfortunately, whichever be the case, I'm not a Maratha. My ancestors are Marathi, living in Mumbai since the past 900 years based on folk songs of my community. What do you think about collaboratively writing a book? We have a lot of folks who have read papers with you. Maybe we can all write a chapter. That would be nice. I have been planning a book someday, obviously in the near future, about how I became a Bengali Hindu. That's the plan I have for my book. He demolishes 2 elite kids on Greece who ate similar to the stupid elites who like communism today, lol. So, okay, let's continue with the paper now. तो भाई ऐसा ट्रेडिशन, परंपरा, संस्कार था कि जब चांस मिला भोसरी के, सबसे पहले सैलरी कम कर दिया सेक्रेट फंक्शनरी का. परंपरा, अनुशासन, प्रतिष्ठा. The murder of Mahatma Gandhi by a Brahmin led to the stoppage of payments to the Joshi in Gulumb and Caste after 1948. By the 1960s, payments to the Mahars had also ended. सबके साथ सबको भिखारी बनने का मौका मिलेगा. धक्का मुक्की मत करो. हम सोशलिस्ट है. We will all be equally भिखारी. The refusal of services and rejection of beggarly payments in kind were also part of the Ambedkarite movement from the late 1920s, and Daya Pawar's memoirs record how these practices were eroding as early as the 1930s. The refusal of services and rejection of beggarly payments in kind were also part of the Ambedkarite movement from the late 1920s. Okay, तो सर्विसेज ही रिजेक्ट कर दिया, बेगरली पेमेंट है इसलिए, उसके बदले में बेटर कुछ मिला क्या? I wonder. Or maybe that's why reservation then. Jagtap studied only 3 villages, but 2 members of the Gokhale Institute staff used the data from the survey of a sample of 72 villages in 8 districts carried out in 1951 through 52 to write Maharashtrachi Gramina Samaj Rachna. The disintegration of the Baluta system was already evident. Landless families paid cash for any services they required, and in many villages, the Balutedars had divided client households among themselves. Mahars were village functionaries in 66 out of 72 villages, but only those serving government actually received any dues from the villagers. Lol. Mahars were village functionaries in 66 out of 72 villages, but only those Mahars who were serving government actually received any dues from the villagers. They served by rotation and had to wait years for their turns to come up. The Mahars were much more alienated from the village system than other functionaries were, and obviously the socialist direction of the rest of the country was not helping them at all. The carpenter was still the most important functionary and found in 60 villages. Dues varied from village to village but were usually paid per plough, or a sort of piece rate. Iron work being more durable, the smith was a balutedar in only 25 villages. Even there, cash had to be paid for some jobs. Many smiths, remember in the beginning, guys, also Anand, since you have not watched from the beginning, Sumit Guha mentions in the interview we discussed in the very beginning that, you see, just like smiths were a caste elsewhere, he talks about smiths like that. Many smiths preferred to locate themselves in roadside villages or towns and work for cash. Itinerant tinkers also serviced the villages. It was difficult for the investigators to ascertain the smiths' baluta dues. They varied by special arrangements or needs. The leather worker was a balutedar in 32 villages. His repair of well buckets and harness was crucial to raising irrigated crops. The description could continue, but the investigators found everywhere found dues being reduced or adjusted according to economic need. और पूरा का पूरा देश गड्ढे में जा रहा है economically, वैसे भी. Individual cultivators gave more or less depending on their employment of particular balutedars. The amount also reflected the yield of the harvest. Still, the investigators could clearly see that the village looks after those balutedars whose absence would cause difficulty. The others are pushed away. See Anand, M. Shastri, Ninar, the classic free market principle, the classic libertarian prerequisite. Okay? Village looks after those balutedars whose absence would cause difficulty. The more irreplaceable you are, the more your value is in society. The age-old fucking principle. Nothing to do with any goddamn book ever written. Thus, even where the village servant system had official recognition and support. Okay, this is in italics, okay? Sumit Guha puts this in italics, so maybe it's more important. Thus, even where the village servant system had official recognition and support, it was continually restructured according to calculations of individual advantage and ultimately largely abandoned. So to sum up, sociologists have tended to take the frequently observed dyadic relation of service and dependence as a given, as stemming from deep-seated cultural traits or fundamental values in Indian society. Implicit in this is the understanding that these are ancient institutions. Historians have been skeptical of this and inclined to argue that the dyadic relations observed in the early 20th century were generated comparatively recently as a consequence of the breakdown of previously extant village communities resulting from changes inaugurated by colonialism. But, of course, a gigantic disruption. But we need probe deeper and ask, what explains the existence of the village servant system in the pre-colonial era? The genesis of a quote-unquote traditional institution. It is noticeable that all the scholars who have studied this problem have assumed that the village organization is itself a relatively unproblematic structure arising perhaps out of the functional needs of isolated rural life. Yet it is striking that the system was strongly developed not in the most isolated regions of 18th century Maharashtra, but rather in its densely settled and commercialized regions. Yes. See, if If commies were fucking honest, libertarians could have been best friends with them in discussing ancient history, but commies are assholes. See, it is striking that the system, okay, what a brilliant paragraph again. It is noticeable that all scholars who have studied this problem have assumed that the village organization is itself a relatively unproblematic structure, arising perhaps out of the functional needs of isolated rural life. गांव के भोसड़ी वाले थे इसलिए कर लिए होंगे, इसलिए शायद traditions में believe करते होंगे. But then why? It is striking that the system was strongly developed not in the most isolated regions of the 18th century Maharashtra, जहां पे सब शायद पूजा पाठ में और ज्यादा विश्वास करते होंगे. It was in its densely settled and commercialized regions. LOL. So it was a very advanced, sophisticated economic system, not Manusmriti. Much, indeed almost all of our evidence on its functioning comes from official efforts at its regulation and control. Advanced economic system, bhai, हम अर्थशास्त्र के intellectual students and descendants hai. I suggest, not really though, but unknowingly, I suggest that this formal and regular structuring originated in the opportunity for the securing of rents as fees or gifts or bribes, and the consequent preparedness of entrepreneurial individuals to pay the whole entrepreneurial individuals, Balmiki capitalists, preparedness of entrepreneurial individuals to pay the holders of political authority for the creation and protection of such rights. Creation of such rights, then protection of such rights. An important aspect of the Jajmani system is then merely one example of widespread phenomenon, which is rent seeking and the investment of resources in creating permanent heritable sources of rents. जोर जोर के बोल के सबको स्कीम बता दो. It is significant that these village offices were called watan, sometimes vritti, both best translated as patrimony, and thus seen as analogous to other property rights in venal office. Thus, at the same time as the detailed descriptions of village servants with fixed dues in kind were being compiled in Western Maharashtra, little trace of any such system could be found in thinly populated areas where the cash economy was undeveloped and the need for fixed services should have been all the greater. वहां पे भोसड़ी के कोई जजमानी नहीं कर रहा है मनुस्मृति पढ़ के. For example, Chhattisgarh, formerly part of the state of Madhya Pradesh, was in the early 19th century a landlocked region with limited trade. When Jenkins wrote his report, he remarked on the absence of watandars, that is, of headmen or peasants possessed of hereditary rights in this area, by contrast to the Maratha territories to the west. The establishment of village servants was equally undeveloped. Okay? The establishment of village servants was equally undeveloped, and those who existed were mainly employed by the Gauntia headman, effectively tax farmer of each village. Even the barber owes professional services to all the village community, but is chiefly employed by the Gauntia. Only the smith and washerman seem to have been mainly employed for the benefit of the farming community as a whole. Thus, craftsmen and specialists were seen as dependents of the village lord, exactly like tenant farmers. Now, we are supposed to think all of this happened because Brahmins planned this. Now, if the argument is that Brahmins sanctioned these things, then of course we are looking at Brahmins not as priests, Brahmins as IAS Babus. Okay, then can we blame IAS Babus in the same way as for doing attestation and sanctioning things that are demanded in society anyway? Or are Babus influencing society as well? I don't think they are. I think the society is being influenced by academics, as was society in some ways. An effort was made to influence society by Brahmins, but it always had socio-economic factors behind it, which maybe were seen by the politicians, the Kshatriyas, and then with collaboration with the Brahmins, they said that, okay, let's make this a rule. But among all these discussions, when is a Brahmin coming up? The only time a Brahmin was mentioned was when he was being an asshole on an individual level, which in fact proves that it had nothing to do with Manusmriti, and when his payment goes down in a society which is supposedly traditional and all about parampara, anushasan, etc. So much of Jenkins' knowledge was drawn from men like Vinayak Rao Aurangabadkar, whom he employed for nearly 20 years. Vinayak Rao spent over 3 years traveling from village to village in Wadhad and Chhattisgarh, interviewing and collecting information on local geography, institutions, antiquities, and practices. The hundreds of folios of his notes deposited in the India Office collection in London bear impressive witness to his industry and command of languages. Much of the material ये देखो भाई British education system है ये. Much of the material consists of direct transcripts of interviews and answers to questions. These field notes therefore give us a fine-grained picture of village institutions and traditions in the early 19th century. Reading them, we find that both Baluta and Jajmani had a very limited presence in this area. Thus Vinayak Rao interviewed Bhimrai Thakur and other Halba landholders of Panadur when touring that area. They understood the term Baluta and responded. There are no Balutadars in Chhattisgarh, but they are found in Panadur. The carpenter receives 3 measures of grain per plough, as does the smith. What the barber gets is determined by each farmer individually. If the local priest, Gond priest, etc., were employed that year, they get a basket of grain plus 2 more measures. It is clear, end quote. It is clear that the really essential functionary had established a fixed claim. Others, including those concerned with purity, the barber, and the supernatural, the priest, had a quasi-wage relationship. This was in a small town. In the smaller villages nearer the mountains, the local covered chiefs stated flatly, quote, in our country, the custom of balotedari does not exist. However, the smith carpenter receives 10 measures of grain for each plough, end quote. The smith would obviously be a vital functionary in a farming economy, and it would be rational to pay him by the year rather than have to bargain every time a plowshare had to be replaced or a tool repaired. The khati or khati, carpenter cum smith, therefore crops up in almost every account. So in Kanker subdivision, there were no village accountants, and Vinayak Rao noted that there were no carpenters. People did their own woodwork. Old school village Texas. But the smith was present and received a basketful of grain for each plough. His clients had to bring their own iron. The washerman was given half or 3/4 shares of grain for each job. Okay, this word is there in Bengali as well. Sher, mon, duimon chaul, aksher chal, etc. The bhumak, local priest. Is this an ancient version or the etymological father of the surname Bhaumik? Because Bhaumik is also a given title to some Brahmins, I know. And I've heard it's because they got land grants, so they got Bhumi, therefore became Bhaumik. So the washerman was given half or 3/4 shares of grain for each job. The bhumak or local priest and the barber received some dues regularly. Similarly, when landholders in Bhadak or Bhadak, modern Chandrapur district of Maharashtra, were questioned about the costs of cultivation, they reported that each plough paid the smith cum carpenter 10 measures. Unclear if this is paili or kudo measure, while the local priest, the village watchman, and the local village watchman and the local priest, okay, local priest दो बार लिख दिया गलती से, while the local priest and the village watchman received 1 measure each. देखो भाई, हमारा परंपरा अनुशासन प्रतिष्ठान वाला मनुस्मृति पढ़ने वाला देश में क्या हो रहा है? विलेज वॉचमैन और लोकल प्रीस्ट को सेम सैलरी मिल रहा है. Yet again in Batalpur subdivision, the village headman told him that the Havaldar, a functionary who helped collect the land tax, received 2 rupees each month from the village fund. In addition, farmers might give him at pleasure up to 1 kudo measure of grain yearly. Kudo is a Bengali word as well. It means round and big. This official had been introduced by the centralizing regime of the Bhosle kings, and we can perhaps see his prerequisites were beginning to harden into quote-unquote custom. Society बनाता है कुछ convenience के वजह से, बाद में उसको जाके custom घोषणा कर दिया जाता है. In other places, it is evident that such prerequisites were beginning to appear as a consequence of the creation of various offices under Bhosle rule, which was accompanied by population growth and commercialization. Kryptonite of commies. As these became offices of profit, individuals would begin to acquire and dispute them, providing a political and fiscal resource for the regime to exploit. Commercialization का है हुआ बेलसा. In the Chimur Division 2, the bigger villages had a functionary called Havaldar who allocated compulsory labor between households and who would consequently have considerable powers of harassment, which he turned to advantage. He would have considerable powers of harassment, which he turned to advantage. So the local people reported that in some places he received a kudo of grain from each farmer, though it was not an approved usage. The headman's messenger and assistant held rent-free land from the state, but also received a measure of grain from each peasant. Aha, kitna manusmriti. So much manusmriti. So much tradition. Oh, so much tradition. Such manusmriti, much tradition. Wow. State obligations fell on every office holder. Even the local priest or bhumak was supposed to feed government messengers if they came to the village and carry messages for the headman. Oh, fuck. He did, however, protect the village from tigers and so received 2 measures of grain. Umrad was a relatively more prosperous subdivision near Nagpur. Much cloth was woven for export and there was an active trade in cotton, grain, etc. The term Bada Balute was known here, but the functionaries listed were Vasi, local priest, amount ineligible, Mahar, 10 kudo measures, sorcerer भी है एक साइड में भाई, priest एक तरफ है, एक sorcerer भी है, मीनिंग कोई तांत्रिक होगा. 1 measure, astrologer 1 measure, local priest 1 measure, a village watchman come messenger 1 and a quarter measures. What is going on? देखो फिर से सच मनुस्मृति मच वाओ, मच ट्रेडिशन. महार का पेमेंट है 10 कुडो मेजर्स, वासी का तो पेमेंट पता नहीं है, लोकल प्रीस्ट का, मगर सॉर्सरर का, एस्ट्रोलॉजर का, लोकल प्रीस्ट का 1 मेजर बाद में लिखा है और विलेज वॉचमैन कम मैसेंजर का है 1.25 measure. But there were no watandars or hereditary holders, and not even a village headman whose family had held the office for generations could claim it as a patrimony. This is a marked contrast to the more densely settled and commercialized lands of Western Maharashtra, where saleable hereditary office was institutionalized by the 16th century, if not earlier. The reason was, I suggest, that the cash economy and competition made hereditary office a desirable acquisition. क्योंकि भाई इतना competition है, तुमको चाहिए होगा job security. See why our IAS babus and WBCS babus today exist. Why kids today prepare for UPSC or WBCS, and why kids say so proudly that, do you know how hard my father worked for this job that is destroying the country? So the reason was, I suggest, that the cash economy and competition made hereditary office a desirable acquisition. So you see, again, the notion that Jajmani is an ancient tradition, thousands of years se chal raha hai, based on tradition, culture, customs, is only observable in places where there's high amount of cash circulating in the system and fucking insanity of competition. And its creation and adjudication was a source of profit to the state and its ever hungry local functionaries. See, kitna manusmriti. The way in which the regulation of the Baluta system could be used to fiscal advantage can be demonstrated by a few extracts from the surviving ledgers of several tax farmers from Western Maharashtra. These span the period from about 1750 to 1825, okay? The way in which the regulation of the Baluta system could be used to fiscal advantage can be demonstrated by a few extracts here. Let's see. So, half a rupee fine realized, Mahar, after fine, okay? Half a rupee for Mahar did not serve the village properly. 1 rupee, a leather worker, if leather worker left the village of Pisarve and went to Amboli. 22 rupees, Sahib Mite Khan beat a Mahar. 1 rupee, leather worker left the village work undone, so he was made to complete it and fined. 1.25 rupees, Santu Potter failed to supply the mask for Mahalakshmi, so fined. तो ये पॉटर का इंडियन लैंग्वेज में क्या ट्रांसलेशन होगा? कुमोर, नो? So his name is probably Shontu Kumor. Kumor Pala, yes. So a neighborhood of only just Kumors. Competition created an exploitative system. Wow. And also an advanced economic system, sophisticated economic system. Competition की वजह से जहाँ पे कुछ है ही नहीं वहाँ पे system भी नहीं है. I would suggest that the opportunities for such fees and fines, as well as the ruling classes' need for specialized services from the villages, on a reliable basis, reliable basis, was important in the transformation of village specialists into hereditary office holders. Hereditary office holders. The changing social and economic conditions we reviewed earlier led to the gradual demise of the institution in the 20th century. But individualized jockeying for social and economic advantage was present at all times. And then that famous fucking conclusion, the sledgehammer, the power packed, bombastic conclusion, okay? It will be evident that I am deeply skeptical of attempts to trace socioeconomic institutions to fundamental values, and that I have found considerable evidence to suggest that individuals systematically sought to modify and invent customs and institutions to their own perceived advantage, and that the patrimonial and the later colonial state tried to derive fiscal and political advantage from these efforts. So, it doesn't have anything to do with birth-based casteism as we know it, or it has nothing to do with Hinduism. The varying outcomes of these ceaseless contests explains why institutions varied considerably at different times in different regions. Society was never static in some traditional mode, and social change is not something that arrived in South Asia with colonial rule or the first 5-year plan. ये ब्रिटिश का भी क्रेडिट नहीं है, ये कांग्रेस का भी क्रेडिट नहीं है. Social change हमेशा होता है because of economics. End notes. I am grateful to John Rogers for several careful readings of this article. Indrani Chatterjee also made some valuable suggestions. The reports of 4 anonymous referees contained many useful comments and corrections. The usual disclaimer holds. I have translated all the citations from Indian sources. Okay, but he worked in Rutgers, so it's end of story. I should rephrase that. Competition without an abundance of opportunity is cash economic created and exasperate. Yes, M. Shastri, yes. Oh my God, what a paper. Oh, by the way, yeah. So, since it's more or less the same amount of people who are watching anyway from the beginning, let me get to 2 or 3 paragraphs of this legendary book called Beyond Good and Evil by Hamare Friedrich Nietzsche. And you'll see the basic fundamental difference in the worldview of what we now, the people watching this and more or less agreeing with me, Mr. Astrologist, etc., versus the commies and Caste strads, okay? Check out how beautifully this work begins, okay? The chapter is called Prejudices of Philosophers. The will to truth, okay? मतलब सच्चाई सत्य के तरफ पहुंचने का जो इच्छा है, जो चाह है, वो will, okay? It's written in capital W. The will to truth, which is to tempt us to many a hazardous enterprise. सत्य की खोज में हो तो हम कहाँ का hazardous जगह में पहुंच जाते हैं. The famous truthfulness with capital T, the famous truthfulness of which all philosophers have hitherto spoken with respect. What questions has this will to truth not laid before us? What strange, perplexing, questionable questions? It is already a long story, yet it seems as if it were hardly commenced. Is it any wonder if we at last grow distrustful, lose patience, and turn impatiently away? What this Sphinx teaches us at last to ask questions ourselves, that this Sphinx teaches us at last to ask questions ourselves. Who is it really that puts questions to us here? What really is this will to truth in us? In fact, we made a long halt at the question as to the origin of this will, that itcha of getting to Satya, until at last we came to an absolute standstill before a yet more fundamental question. Remember Nietzsche's standpoint. He's critiquing Christian morality. I allege that commies, of course, are descendants of Christian morality, but Caste strads are also viewing Hindu society with the lens of Christian morality, where Nietzsche comes in and debunks that. In fact, we made a long halt at the question as to the origin of this will, until at last we came to an absolute standstill before a yet more fundamental question. We inquired about the value of this will. Ye will, is will se kya hoga? Granted that we want the truth, why not rather untruth and uncertainty and even ignorance? Remember that insane quote I pointed out the day I came back with live streams after a month. Remember that quote? That, let me see if I can just find it. Okay, what a brilliant quote it was. It almost described how Hinduism was meant to be versus how some other groups are. Okay, yeah, check out this quote. Objection, evasion, joyous distrust, and love of irony are signs of health. everything absolute belongs to pathology. In context with that, now check this out. That is what the book basically is about. Hence, it's called Beyond These Ideas of Good and Evil. कास्टिज्म था नहीं था, कास्टिज्म खराब था या बहुत बढ़िया था, ये सब के बियॉन्ड एक जगत है. तो why not rather untruth and uncertainty, even ignorance? The problem of the value of truth presented itself before us, or was it we who presented ourselves before the problem? Which of us is the Oedipus here, which the Sphinx? It would seem to be a rendezvous of questions and notes of interrogation. And could it be believed that it at last seems to us as if the problem had never been propounded before, as if we were the first to discern it, get a sight of it, and risk raising it? For there is risk in raising it. Perhaps there is no greater risk. Now it begins this subchapter, three small paragraphs basically. Okay, this second paragraph begins with a small quote. Okay, ये quote कोई fixed आदमी का नहीं है. This is sort of Nietzsche trolling all religious Christian people. Okay, so it's sort of a quote that people like them would say. But when you hear the quote, you will see that casteist trads would probably also agree. Commies will probably also would agree with these kinds of statements. Free market people already know this is absolute horseshit. And now in different contexts, we are finding out that these sorts of worldviews are absolutely horseshit. Check this out, the quote. How could anything originate out of the opposite? For example, how could truth come out of error? Or the will to truth out of the will to deception? Or the generous deed out of selfishness? Or the pure sunbright vision of the wise man out of covetousness? Such genesis is impossible. Whoever dreams of it is a fool, nay, worse than a fool. Things of the highest value must have a different origin, an origin of their own. In this transitory, seductive, illusory, paltry world, in this turmoil of delusion and cupidity, they cannot have their source, but rather in the lap of being with capital B, in the intransitory, in the concealed God, in the thing in itself. There must be their source and nowhere else, end quote. Okay? Before Nietzsche trolls this worldview, see for ourselves. Okay, let's see for ourselves. See, why can't truth come out of error? तुम गलती कर करके तो समझ सकते हो कि अरे भोसरी के वो सत्य तो कुछ और था. Being commie for 26 years can obviously make you a great Hindutvadi. Why can't will to truth come out of will to deception? And more importantly, for any free market, pro-free market guy, this is the most obvious one. Why can't generous deed come out of selfishness? Selfishly, for your own interests, so that your company is brilliant and gives you the best profits, you run such a stable fucking company that you employ thousands of people for decades and decades. Okay? मगर ऐसा नहीं होगा. अच्छे results के लिए बहुत अच्छे, seemingly अच्छे desires होने चाहिए. Okay? That's the bullshit worldview. Now Nietzsche trolls this. This mode of reasoning discloses the typical prejudice by which metaphysicians of all times can be recognized. This mode of valuation is at the back of all their logical procedure. Through this quote-unquote belief of theirs, they exert themselves for their quote-unquote knowledge for something that is in the end solemnly christened quote-unquote the truth. Okay? खुद ने अपना लॉजिक बनाया, खुद ने बिलीफ बनाया, खुद ने उसको नॉलेज घोषणा कर दिया, उसके बाद उससे जो मिला बोल दिया कि यही भोसरी के ट्रूथ है. The fundamental belief of metaphysicians is the belief in antithesis of values. It never occurred even to the wariest of them to doubt here on the very threshold, where doubt, however, was most necessary. Because it may be doubted, firstly, whether antithesis exists at all. And secondly, whether antithesis exists at all. Wow. And secondly, whether the popular valuations and antithesis of value upon which metaphysicians have set their seal are not perhaps merely superficial estimates. Isn't it? Aren't we realizing that these are fucking superficial estimates? कास्ट है या नहीं है, हिंदुइज्म खराब है या बुरा है, हिंदुइज्म के वजह से कास्ट हुआ है बहुत बढ़िया है, या फिर हिंदुइज्म के वजह से कास्टिज्म हुआ है therefore हिंदुइज्म घटिया है. So, for it may be doubted, firstly, whether antithesis exists at all, and secondly, whether the popular valuations and antithesis of value upon which metaphysicians have set their seal are not perhaps merely superficial estimates, merely provisional perspectives. Merely provisional perspectives, besides being probably made from some corner, perhaps from below, quote unquote, frog perspectives, okay? नीचे से कोने से कोई देख रहा है, हाँ हाँ ऐसा होगा शायद. As it were, to borrow an expression current among painters, frog perspective. In spite of all the value which may belong to the true, the positive, the unselfish, it might be possible that a higher and more fundamental value for life generally should be assigned to pretense, to the will to delusion, to selfishness and cupidity. It might even be possible that what constitutes the value of those good and respected things consists precisely in their being insidiously related, knotted, meaning KNOTTED, वो मतलब बंधा हुआ, related, knotted, and crocheted to these evil and apparently opposed things, perhaps even in being essentially identical with them. Perhaps. But who wishes to concern himself with such dangerous perhapses? For that investigation, one must await the advent of a new order of philosophers, okay, like Joker said. We need a new batch of new crop of philosophers, such as will have other tastes and inclinations, the reverse of those hitherto prevalent, philosophers of the dangerous perhaps, in every sense of the term. And to speak in all seriousness, I see such new philosophers beginning to appear. I hate to put this book down. जब पढ़ना शुरू करता हूँ लगता है एकदम फिर से पढ़ते रहूं. I'll just read 2 more paragraphs. Having kept a sharp eye on philosophers and having read between their lines long enough, I now say to myself that the greater part of conscious thinking must be counted among the instinctive functions. And it is so even in the case of philosophical thinking. One has here to learn anew, as one learned anew about the heredity and innateness. As little as the act of birth comes into consideration in the whole process and procedure of heredity, just as little is being conscious opposed to the instinctive in any decisive sense. The greater part of the conscious thinking of a philosopher is secretly influenced by his instincts and forced into definite channels. This is where again René Girard comes in. René Girard says, भाई रीजन विजन कुछ नहीं है, सब है इंस्टिंक्ट, सब है बेसिक डिजायर, उसके बाद रीजन comes as a sort of a PR manager or lawyer to justify your actions which you had already decided. And behind all logic and its seemingly sovereignty of movement, there are valuations, or to speak more plainly, physiological demands for the maintenance of a definite mode of life, for example, that the certain is worth more than the uncertain, that illusion is less valuable than truth. Oh my God, illusion is less valuable than truth. Such valuations, in spite of their regulative importance for us, might notwithstanding be only superficial valuations, special kinds of niaisery, such as may be necessary for the maintenance of beings such as ourselves. Supposing in effect that man is not just the measure of things, the falseness of an opinion is not for us any objection to it. It is here, perhaps, that our new language sounds most strangely. The question is how far an opinion is life furthering, life preserving, species preserving, perhaps species rearing, and we are fundamentally inclined to maintain that the falsest opinions to which the synthetic judgments a priori belong are the most indispensable to us, that without a recognition of logical fictions, without a comparison of reality with the purely imagined world, of the absolute and immutable, without a constant counterfeiting of the world by means of numbers, man could not live, that the renunciation of false opinions would be a renunciation of life, a negation of life. To recognize untruth as a condition of life, that is certainly to impugn the traditional ideas of value in a dangerous manner, and a philosophy which ventures to do so has thereby alone placed itself beyond good and evil. बहुत सारे कमेंट्स आए अनंत के, देखते हैं. Anything absolute is of pathology, yes. That's why Kushal is ninja. Oh, I see. I admire Ninja. He's a person who went down the rabbit hole and came up with an answer, but the price for Curious, so do you accept objective morality or subjective morality, or is there a third option? Yes, there is a third option. See, there is multivariant truths and stuff. Example के बिना हम discuss नहीं कर सकते, but I'm mentally too fatigued to get into that right now. I'm sorry. He is the tradition of Socrates, in my honest opinion, although he is the intellectual father of even Foucault. It's great to listen to such great question. Yeah. To me, always the question is more important than the answer. The spark of intellect starts from the ability to question. Yes, and that is our tradition. No, all our texts, our conversations, questions, somebody not understanding something and asking the deity, the god, or the master himself. Like वो Srila Prabhupada's book Beyond Illusion and Doubt. वहां पे disciple प्रश्न पूछ रहा है. श्री विज्ञान भैरव तंत्र 600 AD कश्मीरी शैविज्म के एरा में लिखा गया. वहां पे भैरव is asking questions and clearing her doubts with Bhairav himself. Dislike Stoicism. Socrates himself did not follow his philosophy, which he preached in certain times. But if you create a philosophy, usko khud to follow karo. But Socrates was the ultimate contrarian. It's natural that he. But it's the instinct to not accept something as the final answer that I like about him. Yehi hai. Well said, Anand. Not accept something as the final answer. Yehi to hai wo health, the sign of health, the love of irony. अच्छा, ओ ऐसा हुआ, कितना hilarious बात है. सब कुछ में दिमाग हिल जाना, वही है pathology. J. Krishnamurti, another great contrarian. Hence, for me, the honest philosopher was Diogenes. He followed what he preached. But then he was a preacher, not a philosopher. You are supposed to seek with no predestination and flow as your logic takes you. So good, that last line. Yes. Good answer. You didn't fall for the black and white fallacy. So many people fall for that. The questions are more important than the answers. That's the dharmic way. Even in Gita too, it's all about, the entire Gita is a conversation. Questions. What am I supposed to do here? How long is this? You mean the live stream or the book? Live stream abhi end ho raha hai. Let's wait for Nina's answer and then we'll go offline. What a fascinating live stream it was. But more importantly, ponder over this, contemplate over this once again. Why is Sumit Guha not in the country teaching in some private institution or government institution or think tank? Why is Mr. Sociologist not in such positions? Why is that, let's call him secret sociologist, okay? Why is Mr. Secret Sociologist, much more senior to Mr. Sociologist, is not in any Indian institution? The book is not very long. See, itna hai, thin book. मगर slowly पढ़ना पड़ेगा. थोड़ा complex English तो है ही, translation है फिर भी. And वो concepts are so fascinating, so juicy, beautiful. गर मतलब फ्लुएंटली पढ़ने से वो मजा नहीं आएगा. एक दो पैराग्राफ पढ़ के थोड़ा सोचने में ही मजा है. How long? The pages are 226 pages. This print at least. Okay then. Thank you for joining the live stream, guys. Fascinating live stream today. সতী প্রথার কোনো ঘটনা কি বেঙ্গলে পাওয়া যায়? মীনাক্ষী লেখি না, মীনাক্ষী জৈন রে ভাই, কার মীনাক্ষী লেখি said there is none. তাহলে রাজা রামমোহন রায় আর সতী রিলেটেড ট্রুথ কি? What I've come to understand is that the main incidents of sati happened in Rajasthan. There were some definitely happening in Bengal. Okay, no evidence is not something I've heard of, but the numbers were definitely not too many. People were maybe trying to get into that more क्योंकि अचानक उसको वो custom का शायद stamp लग गया था. So in that situation, Rammohn Roy was used by the British government to prevent it. It's not like British government were trying to do away with all evil customs and stuff. Rammohn Roy को शायद groom भी किया जा रहा था. There will be no political protection for folks like Sumit Guha. Yeah, a tenure job would be a political protection. No, आप कोई जाके मार दे तो वो तो अलग बात है. ब्राह्मण हत्या तो हमारे यहाँ बहुत ही लुक डाउन अपन है, वो तो हमको प्रिवेंट करना ही है. But the way his stature is, 81 में कैम्ब्रिज से PhD कर लिया है, उसको यहाँ पे कुछ बढ़िया एडवाइजर ही बना देते. Will Dr. Sumit Guha come back to India even if his salary is at par? I don't see why wouldn't he, because his entire work is about India only. You don't need a lot of words to say profound things. Oh my God, yes. Some of the best books I have are the shortest ones. That is one hilarious thing I found out after getting back my reading habit. How I Became a Hindu, Sitaram Goel's book. This book. The moment he says caste is a British concept, Guha will be driven out of the country. Wait, they don't say profound things. I apologize for implying they would. Tenure job won't help you or prevent you from rabid crowds to come after you. अरे crowds कितने दिन आएंगे? एक दो दिन भगा देंगे. Meenakshi Lekhi. But Meenakshi Jain is a Lekhika, so then Meenakshi Lekhi short for him. Standard of living. Yeah, you can have such Western standard of living in South Bombay and New Delhi, Hyderabad, Bangalore, okay? Without the risk of getting shot in your campus. You need a political party to protect academics, to keep rabid crowds away. You need Kshatriyas to protect Brahmins. Mr. Babone said that he won't be working in Delhi because of pollution. Yeah, but at least he is doing India-centric work because of some collaboration with, I guess, India, or Indian government or Indians. वो भी कोई approach नहीं कर रहा है सुमित गुहा को. Someday discuss Bartaman Bharat by Swamiji. Yeah, someday. Oh my God, I would not live in Delhi even if there was no pollution. I have seen so many academics who were driven away by rabid crowds headed by politicians. Yeah. तो मतलब, see, my prerequisite of course is that they do protect him. Of course, they defend him publicly. They I mean, prevent all the physical violence and stuff. They quash those protests, and they make sure that they are not going to take these violent measures lightly. Uske baad hi. Okay, thanks for joining the live stream, guys. Bye bye. Good night.
श्रवरूढं महाभीमं गुणाद्रष्टाम्बरप्रदम् अस्य युक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरां मुक्तकेशीं ललज्जयं पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् काली काली महाकाली कालिके पापहारिणी धर्मर्थ मोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते धर्मर्थ मोक्षदे देवी